Word should reach Riverrun slightly after we reach the castle ourselves, but the whole realm will know at the same time as the Tullys. Hoster will never find a proper match for the girl that will satisfy his greed. I myself will naturally refuse such a woman for my son Brandon. Luckily for Hoster, Princess Elia has invited Lady Lysa to join the princess as a handmaiden at court, the only option left to the young girl's father when the rumors abound. And thinking his daughter Caitlin too good for my Brandon now, Hoster will end up breaking the betrothal between the two, of that I have no doubt. But mark my words, John, I will make both his daughters look like second-hand goods in the eyes of the realm, one with a dead bastard and the other with a broken betrothal. The lords will see Caitlin's broken betrothal as Hoster's fault in the end, not Brandon's. I will see to that myself. Don't tell Brandon he won't have to marry the fish, though. I know my idiot son would not be able to keep himself contained if he was aware. Brandon would also appear way too happy, and right now, I'm entirely fine with letting him wallow in misery. Better than having Brandon destroy years of planning because Brandon once more cannot keep it in his pants, or keep his mouth shut. Our original plan needs to be revisited anyways because the principal reason we invited Hoster to the table years ago is redundant. Tywin Lannister is no longer the king's hand. And after Aerys robbed Tywin of his heir last year at Harrenhal, the Great Lion must be seething for retribution. John, we don't need the Tullys to block the river road to the west. Neither do we need Hoster's loyal vassals at Pink Maiden, Wayfarer's Rest, Acorn Hall, and Stony September to obstruct the Westermen on the Gold Road. Instead, we will invite Tywin Lannister himself into our den and decide with him how to split the Reach, the Riverlands and the Crown Lands. Depending on whether Doran Martell and your ward Robert join us as allies, all of us will profit as the dragons dance themselves to the brink of their destruction. The Florents and the Tyrells will choose different sides in the war to come regardless and set the Reach aflame. With the Tarlis now firmly on the side of the Fox, we only need to ensure the war to the south does not end too early. The Seven Kingdoms have served their purpose, it is time the regions separate again. Now that almost 300 years of stagnation come to an end, us old kings should come together to redraw the borders of Westeros once again. The spark has been lit, let us feed the flames of war until all that remains are ashes. And when war is done and the dust has settled, I will piss on the graves of the dragons and fishes and show the world why you do not rouse the wolf from his lair. John was left just as speechless as Ned and Elbereth as Rickard heaved, a sack of venom weeks in the making unloading in front of them. While the two young ones were still coming to grasp with the enormity of the undertaking in front of them, John was frantically going over the rough edges of what Rickard had just revealed. 7. It fits so perfectly. It could really work. The cunning, the secrecy involved would be staggering, and John could see Ned trying to come to grips with the treason they were about to commit. John knew their endeavor was standing in direct contrast to the notions of honor the young man steadfastly clung to, the self-same notions John had instilled in Ned. Rickard apparently saw the same, and with a bark the Lord of Winterfell got his son's attention with a single spoken line. To Dragonstone I pledge the faith of Winterfell. Ned spoke on, as in trance. Hearth and heart and harvest I yield up to you, my king. Our swords and spears and arrows are yours to command. Grant mercy to my weak, help to my helpless, and justice to all, and I shall never fail you. I swear it by earth and water. I swear it by bronze and iron. I swear it by ice and fire. John knew these words. He had heard similar ones once before, spoken by a young Howland Reed to Brandon Stark when Lyanna had brought the man into the Stark tent at Harrenhal, just after Howland had been savaged by 3 squires at the tourney ground. The Cranogman could barely stand back then, but even as Howland's blood was flowing from his wounds, the heir of Greywater Watch had knelt in the dirt in front of the Starks and pledged his fealty. A powerful oath. When John had asked Ned about it later that day, Ned had told John the words went back to Brandon the Builder. The old words were still a common oath of fealty among traditional First Men houses in the north, houses such as the Umbers, the Reeds, the Mountain Clans, and others. Rickard looked upon his son Ned in satisfaction as Rickard spoke, and John and Elbereth listened in with rapt attention. Torrhen's words, Ned. Mercy. Help. Justice. All that was denied to us Starks not a fortnight passed by our king. It is not us Starks who are betraying the dragons, son. It is the dragons who have betrayed us Starks. And Ned stilled, only acceptance in his eyes. None of their entire group spoke another word until they broke camp. Notes. Everyone's favorite poet has entered the stage. It feels kinda weird to see Eddard Stark described as such. And finally the top conspirators of the rebellion come together again, to cut out the third of the original old men and bring in another. Will it all work out as our favorite slap dispenser plans? Stick around to find out. Also, here you go with another snippet. A Lady of the Vale, oh, Lady Dane, you are so lucky to have snatched the great Ned before all of us realized his greatness. Tell me, what is it that you love the most about him? Ashura, his tongue. The lady, dreamily, how he weaves words with it. I entirely understand, my lady. I hope in my future there will also be a man so skilled with his poems. Ashura, deadpan, right. I love his tongue because of his skill with words and poetry. Right. Chapter 9, Such a Splendid Match. Notes. Title quote. I have always done my duty, she thought. Perhaps that was why her lord father had always cherished her best of all his children. Her two older brothers had both died in infancy, so she had been son as well as daughter to Lord Hoster until Edmure was born. Then her mother had died and her father had told her that she must be the Lady of Riverrun now, and she had done that too. And when Lord Hoster promised her to Brandon Stark, she had thanked him for making her such a splendid match. Catelyn Stark, A Clash of Kings. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. When news had come that Rickard Stark was returning from King's Landing to Riverrun, alive and with his son in tow, her husband Walter had raved that he could not be bothered to return to his liege's keep again. Who knew whether the wedding would actually take place this time, Walter had said. Of course, no one could say. In fact, Shella found it highly unlikely that the wedding would go off without a hitch now that the Stark heir was not the Stark heir anymore. Shella had seen Rickard Stark when the man had left Riverrun to chase after his wayward son, calm and collected and calculating. Hoster had made an enemy that day, insulted and chased off a true beast, and now the wolf was returning from his hunt. Shella shuddered at the thought of what Rickard might have in store for the children of Shella's cousin. Shella knew that to Hoster his daughters were only pieces in the big game. But Minissa had dearly loved Catelyn, Lysa and Edmure. Shella could not believe it when all her contacts from the capital had shared the opinion that Rickard Stark was nothing but a northern barbarian, straightforward, honest to a fault and without a single strand of hair capable of cunning or intrigue in his beard. How did the old wolf manage to leave that impression on the hyenas at court and depart from their keg of wildfire in a shower of sparks without all those fools shaking in their boots? Rickard Stark's actions would start the civil war that had been looming over the entire realm since the defiance at Duskendale, and afterwards the man had extricated himself from court in a masterstroke, taking a princess with him and leaving a battlefield of political corpses. The king showed himself a threat to all his lords, the prince's men were all but banished from court and the capital's vultures in open opposition to one another. Sure, Rickard Stark's demeanor spoke of a bumbling fool leaving chaos behind, but his results in themselves spoke another language. People would notice, of course. The queen would know, likely the sly woman had already approached Rickard Stark over the matter of her son Rhaegar and Rickard's daughter. Some sort of accord had probably been reached between Rhaegar Targaryen and Rickard Stark, but to what end Shella knew not. If it were different the king would have called for the head of his Warden of the North. After all, almost nothing got past Varys. Two other explanations to Rickard Stark retaining his head were either the wolf was as simple as he showed himself to the world, or the spider had been compromised. And while Shella knew to dismiss the first of those options, the second scared her. Others would see the smoke in the King's Landing as well, the waters muddy with blood of tomorrow. No true player of the great game would misread the chaos in the capital for a mistake. The Great Lion, the Old Falcon, the Thorny Rose, the Calm Kraken, and the Viper Brothers of Dawn, most important among the players, were all going to take heed. Not the trout, ever grasping as Hoster Tully was. The man was probably as bigoted and blind as ever. If Rickard Stark had died on the pyre, Hoster Tully would have stood at the crossroads of the war with the power of a kingmaker in his hands. Now Hoster was in danger of becoming mere prey to the true players, without rash young fools like Brandon Stark to run off into a war and elevate Hoster to heights he always dreamt of. If Shella's thoughts proved true, Hoster would bring about the downfall of House Tully in his greed and ambition. Shella would have her answer when the wolves were back at Hoster's door again. So Shella had shown her husband who the heiress to House Went was, and that Walter had only become a lord through his marriage to her. Oh, Walter had raged, but Shella's vassals, her servants and the small folk would fall in line behind Shella, and Walter knew it. So, just as Walter wished, when Shella set off to the wedding that would not happen, she left him behind. On Shella's instruction, her husband Lord Walter Went was to be kept confined to his chambers until she returned Riverrun. More important things than a marital union were at stake there now, after all. Shella took her two youngest along to Riverrun with her, her son Simon and her darling Linya. While the boy was not the best with a sword among her 4 sons, he did have the quickest mind and was not fool enough to question Shella's actions like her other sons Henry and Frank. The 2 idiots had joined their father in confinement as Shella left. Still, Shella was glad that her eldest son Leon at least knew how to read the game a little. After all, Leon was aware in whose hands the power of Harrenhal rested. Walter had been left to his devices for too long and seemed to dream of his own grandeur. Her fool husband had probably been influenced by his brother, and Oswell had lived his formative years under the White Bull in the Reach. A wonder that Oswell's perspective on women became so backwards. One had to consider that as a squire Oswell lived in a region under Tyrell rule, he would know the power women could hold. The whole region lived under the iron heel of the Queen of Thorns, no matter how fashionable Olena's shoes were. With all the sad business of the tourney last year still haunting the Wents still, it was time for Shella to take a more active part in commanding her castle again. And if her brother-in-law Oswell got another idea of advancing the royal designs of his mentor's old high tower by whispering into the ear of Shella's husband, to use the Wents' position in those designs once more, well, then it might just be time for another spot in the Kingsguard to become vacant, after only a year of young Jaime Lannister's appointment. Dreadful business when Sir Grandison could not be roused anymore. Webbing and Venom and 3 lions lay victim, though the youngest of the lions was left blissfully unaware as he welcomed the poisoned gift, the induction of the youngest knight ever in the history of the Kingsguard. And even as Shella remained silent on the distasteful matter, sitting between King's Landing and Lannisport as she was, a little bird carried Shella's message to the intended ear before her bats chased the rest of the small flock from Shella's halls. A message stayed granted, a favor untold yet. After all, the Master of Whispers himself knew best that, even without evidence, mere words would be enough to compel the high and mighty King Aerys into action if it served to combat imagined traitors. Now the spider owed Shella a large favor, but certainly not obedience. Not like the spider owed the wolf, as it seemed. Rickard Stark must have serious intel on Varys himself, to force the spider's compliance. Even Shella's bats in the capital only knew the eunuch beat a hasty retreat in the face of the Warden of the North. Shella and her party made good time on the river road towards Riverrun. She estimated they would have at least another week before the groom and his father arrived after them. Hoster received Shella in the courtyard of Riverrun, though he did not seem happy at her arrival. Rather, the man looked on with a tense expression as Lord Blackwood and Shella dismounted with their retinue. Tytos had joined the Wents at Harrentown. The new Lord of Raventree Hall had been on the way back from the Isle of Faces after some silly old god's inheritance ritual of his house. Shella suspected, though, that young Tytos travelled to Riverrun more for the expected spectacle than out of sudden political insightfulness. Many a banner could be spied already on the men milling about Riverrun, Brackens and Pipers and Vances and Smallwoods and Mallisters among them. Finally, Minnes's children approached. Caitlin and Edmure at least greeted her enthusiastically, even as Lysa was strangely absent. The Blackfish was on the edge of the plaza, his eyes fixed on his brother Hoster with a truly murderous stare. This looked to be worse than another attempt by Hoster to pawn Brynden off in a marriage alliance gone awry. Brynden would be the one to crack when Shella asked about what to expect this week. The man always had had a soft spot for Shella's side of the family, after all. Soon Shella would at least know what Hoster wished for, and what Brynden dreaded. "Auntie Shella, we are so happy you could make your way here again. Is it not wonderful? Father was so certain my Brandon would that he would not return." Caitlin seemed to choke on her emotions as she spoke before visibly brightening again. "But now Brandon is coming back. For me." Caitlin at least seemed happy that her promised was to return to her, even if Hoster's visage darkened at the mere mention of Brandon Stark's name. Gods, how empty had the old trout left the heads of his children. Enough rumors of Brandon's raucous behavior had circulated for years, how could Shella's little niece not have heard of any of them? Did anyone ever tell Caitlin that her knight in shining armor came from the kingdom without knights? And now, with Brandon's position as heir to the north in jeopardy, where would that leave his little southern wife Caitlin? Still, Shella did not have the heart to break her nieces. Besides, it might prove dangerous to Shella's house to be too close to the Tullys in these volatile times. In the end Shella only gave her niece a tight hug and prayed Hoster would not continue his streak of obstinate stupidity, all the while telling Caitlin sweet nothings. Linya and Simon distracted Minnes's two children as Shella made polite, if dull, conversation with her liege Hoster afterwards. God, the man did not seem able to conceptualize that women could have a mind for something other than comfort and romance and sewing. How Minnes's father ever thought a marriage could bring the Wentz a boon was beyond her. Hoster Tully obviously did not understand that ties were to bind an alliance together both ways. Alliances were not supposed to only to support everything always in Hoster's favor. Shella left Hoster soon after to seek out his brother Bryndon, who at least did not insult Shella's intelligence. Sadly, the Blackfish had little mind for politics, or anything beyond the sword and the battlefield, for that matter. Still, maybe such a conversation was warranted now. Marriages were the highest tool of politics, after all, and Bryndon was intimately familiar with proposals. Also, men were prone to speak truths without knowing they did, especially military men such as Bryndon. Shella finally found Bryndon still up on the balustrade overlooking the courtyard and called out to him. Bryndon, I see you are as happy with Hoster as ever. Did he bring up another red wine girl for you to marry? That brought out the anticipated scowl on Bryndon's face. The foolish man would start ranting. Bryndon could never shut up about the wrongs his brother Hoster committed towards Bryndon. No. That, Shella knew as she startled, was a surprising answer. And it meant that Hoster had truly alienated his brother, likely in a very, very stupid fashion. So, not just another proposal for Bryndon, there was only one button Shella knew that, if pushed, would have Bryndon so furious with his brother. Hoster must have done something to one of the children. And seeing Caitlin and Edmure frolicking in front of Shella with her own children, Lysa was the victim. Hoster, you foolish man. Shella dropped all friendly pretense as she continued with Bryndon. What did your brother do to her? Nothing, I will tell you. Nothing I can tell you. Bryndon only spared Shella a short glance as he answered, his face mellowing as shame crossed it. Shame and pity. Shella was beginning to feel a little curious. And angry, she felt angry. This did not look to be good. Bryndon. Minissa was my favorite cousin, and even if your brother does not care about us Wentz as kin, her children are my family. So, tell me. You will not brush me away, Bryndon. I would get inventive. A little scowl helped against Bryndon as she talked. The Blackfish did not have a mind for politics, but he knew Shella had one. And Bryndon knew threats well enough when he heard them, even political ones. Bryndon had been Minissa's and Minissa's children's confidant more than Minissa's misogynistic husband Hoster himself, and the Blackfish had traveled the Seven Kingdoms a lot in his knighting days. Bryndon was perceptive enough to understand who ruled Harrenhal in truth, and as young as House Wentz's claim was to Harren's old seat, Harrenhal's lands and armies and position always gave smart men pause. Especially military men from the Riverlands. Lysa almost died recently. Hoster is responsible, I cannot tell you how. What I can do is forget to lock her door tonight. You know the way, Shella. Raise a fuss when you see her, do me a favor. Bryndon was bitter, truly. Some of Shella's anger deflated. Now there was only small anticipatory kindling of wrath left in Shella, waiting to explode in a bonfire. And worry. Bryndon's words promised foul things. However, there was more to be talked about with the Blackfish. Lysa would have to wait until tonight. I'll go for a walk tonight then, Bryndon. Still, that is not what has Hoster on edge. How is our liege's reaction to the news from the capital? Anything special I can expect at this second attempt at a wedding? Bryndon did not reply immediately. Strange, for such a snappy man. There must have been many a change in House Tully in such a short time span. When Bryndon finally answered, it did deliver a few surprises. I am worried, Shella. I cannot tell what the wolf is planning, but what I know gives me hope and fear in equal measure. Hoster did not part with Lord Stark in good spirit, it is well known. My brother was telling the Northman that his son Brandon was dead already, and Hoster would not sacrifice good riverman on a fool's errand. Hoster would not order his men to follow the old wolf as Ricard rode straight into the death trap that was waiting for him in King's Landing. Immediately afterwards, as if that breach of trust weren't insult enough, my brother tried to change the betrothal agreement to a new marriage between Caitlin and Ricard's second son Eddard. Ricard Stark was, unsurprisingly, rather wroth with Hoster at that. So, Lord Stark simply rode off with his 200 northern troops in silence as Hoster decried Stark a northern savage, without any understanding for southern politics. I think my brother was hoping for the old wolf to die and then pressure his new heir Eddard into a new alliance, what with the heir of the Vale at risk and the bride of the Stormlord whisked away. Hoster already fancied himself kingmaker. Brindon snorted at that, almost satisfied that Hoster was now suffering from his rash idiocy. Seven hells, what had happened to Lysa to anger the Blackfish so? Brindon continued, mirth lacing his words as he spoke. But Ricard Stark survived and became the king's new favorite Lord Paramount. Brandon is disinherited, but the betrothal contract between the boy and Caitlin stands, still. Hoster is not happy with seeing his prized daughter wed to an idiot without a piece of shit to his name, as my dear brother calls it. Not that Hoster ever cared Brandon was a piece of shit himself. Hoster had no regard for that before, all that mattered was what Brandon Stark stood to inherit. Now Hoster will probably try to change the marriage contract that is in place, either to match up Caitlin with Eddard or, if that doesn't work, Lysa with Brandon. All to keep our prized Tully broodmare ready for a worthy candidate. Brindon was brooding over that a lot by the looks of him. So, Hoster stood to antagonize the Wolf Lord further. Idiot. That could not be all though. After a lengthy stare from Shella, Brindon did continue, finally. There's more, Shella. Lysa has gotten an invitation from the capital, to serve as Princess Elia's handmaiden. Hoster will take that chance if Lysa does not end up wed by the end of the next fortnight, with all the eligible lords that are coming for the wedding. He has damaged his daughter irreparably, but all Hoster cares about is how Lysa will reflect on our house. If the whole situation weren't so personal, it could have been morbidly funny. You wouldn't believe it, Shella. Hoster almost shut himself when, not a day passed, a raven came in from Wayfarer's Rest, from Tywin Lannister himself of all people. The old lion was writing he would arrive soon and that he was grateful for Lord Stark's invitation to attend the wedding between the houses Tully and Stark. Grateful. Before Harrenhal Hoster wanted to marry Lysa to Tywin's son, but since then, there is only been bad blood between Riverrun and Casterly Rock. There've been more surprise guests announcing their presence. The new Fox Lord from the Reach, Alistair Florent, wrote us that he was on his way by Raven. The Queen of Thorns sends her regards and apologized she will not be in attendance because her 5th grandchild is supposed to be born any day now. 3rd Rosebud of Highgarden they call it already, Aeleri Hightower is breeding the next alliance pieces for her mother-in-law. The Riverlords are coming in force, despite the recent change of dates for the wedding. And, to top it all off, apparently the Stag Lord got bored at the Eyrie without his foster father and brother to keep him company. So, Robert Baratheon decided to ride after Jon Arryn and Eddard Stark left 2 days before him. And while Tywin Lannister is the only new addition coming with an invitation, Hoster only sees potential brides and grooms lining up for his children in all the additional guests that are appearing at our doorstep. But Hoster is wrong, Shella. I see all that is happening now as the calm before the storm. This wedding will be last great gathering of lords in peacetime, to build factions between only us lords without the dragons before the war breaks out. Those news were worrying, to say the least. Lysa Tully in the princess clutches was the easiest riddle to decipher. With Elia's daughter in the hands of the enemy of her husband Rhaegar, the Dornish woman needed leverage. The sister of the Ricard Stark's future daughter-in-law was the only person Elia Martell could get her hands on without insulting Lord Stark. Shella did not even want to imagine how the wolf would react if the Mistress Lyanna were the one to be called to court to serve as Princess Elia's lady-in-waiting. The old lion's presence at the wedding, though. All Riverlords knew of Tywin's split with Hoster after Sir Jaime had taken up the White Cloak. Riverrun and Casterly Rock could have built a powerful bloc, together with the Eyrie and Winterfell, uniting 4 of the 5 northern regions together. After all, no one trusted the squids far enough to include them with anything. A-lister Florent had shown himself to be intelligent so far, in marrying one daughter of his to Tully and another to Hightower, but this involvement in pre-war politicking rank of too much ambition from the Lord of Brightwater Keep. Not a good quality when one stands opposite to the Queen of Thorns, but if the fox played his cards right, the Florents might be able to finally usurp the Tyrell's position in the Reach in the coming war. Lytton Hightower would probably be inclined to back his daughter Aelaire's family before his wife's family in the conflict at the start, but Old Town was flanked by Hornhill and Brightwater Keep. Lord Lytton Hightower could probably be persuaded to sit the conflict out and follow the winning side in that Reach at the end. Why the whoring warrior of the Eyrie made his way over to the wedding was anyone's guess, though the explanation of Robert Baratheon simply following one of his whims was as likely to be true as any other reason. Shella did keep most of her thoughts on the matter to herself, though. Even as Brynden was not likely to care much about the talk behind closed doors that would ensure over the entirety of the wedding period, it would not help advance Shella's interests to distract the Blackfish from his grudge against his own brother Hoster. Depending on how Hoster managed to handle all the trouble coming his way in the coming days, Shella might approach the other lords in attendance on whether the Trouts were still fit to rule the rivers. Then, when Hoster might still mourn his chance gone by to become kingmaker, the paramountcy of the Riverlands would be open for Shella and the Riverlords to plot over. After trading a few more friendly barbs and small talk with the Blackfish, Shella left, retiring to her quarters with her children. Only later in the evening did Shella emerge again to seek out her shy little niece Lysa. Coming down the corridor towards Lysa's chamber, Shella was first hit with a pungent floral scent. Shella knew this type of aroma was usually caused by burning incense candles to mask the stench of death and corruption that men carried with them when their battle wounds festered and started to rot. She'd often smelled it at the Maesters' tents at the tourney last year. Some of Riverrun's servants tried to divert Shella from her path now, but Shella was having none of that and hastened towards Lysa's room. Finding the door to Lysa's room closed but not unlocked, Shella was greeted by an air reeking of stale sweat and tears, the wine of the Maesters and recent death. Her cousin Minissa's darling daughter Lysa looked a skeleton with skin. Lysa's matted hair no longer looked bright tully red, the color instead dulled and the strands frayed. Lysa's face was pale, her pallor that of a man embalmed with a waxy sheen to it. Shella would have thought herself standing before a corpse if not for the quiet, rattled breaths and the agonizingly slow rise of Lysa's chest. Lysa's cheeks had sunken in and the bags underneath Lysa's eyes seemed to carry more blood than the rest of her body. How could Catelyn and Edmure be so merry when their sister was knocking on death's door? Why was Lysa on death's door? The door behind Shella opened and one of Hoster's servants burst in, freezing in place as Shella fixed him with a stare screaming murder. When Shella spoke to the man, that same ice carried in her voice as well. "Tell your lord I'll be expecting a talk with him later. But if Hoster Tully disturbs me while I comfort my niece, I will be very wroth with him. Now. Out." The servant showed his intelligence by leaving at the drop of a hat. The man even ran off so fast he dropped the key to Lysa's. Shella locked up behind the servant and then sat down beside Lysa. The young girl Shella had come to love since Lysa was a young girl dreaming of knights and love. As Shella was taking Lysa's pallid, trembling hand into Shella's own, the little girl in the bed tried to pull away in her dreams, fitful as Lysa slept. Her niece's mumbling left Shella in a pit of dread most deep. "Petter, forgive me, blood, so much, red, our baby, so much blood, father, why, just tea, not tansy, it was tea." Lysa kept whispering on and on, her words repeating endlessly. Shella had known of the Tully ward. Petter Baelish was always hanging on to the Tully girls when Shella came to visit Minissa and Minissa's children. And the boy had been obviously, hopelessly in love with Catelyn. All the Riverlands had spoken of the foolish and feeble Tully ward that had challenged the Wild Wolf for the favor of the elder Tully daughter. But apparently Petter Baelish had ended up catching the wrong fish in his net. Shella pressed a kiss to Lysa's forehead as her young niece slowly calmed. To soothe little Lysa, Shella sang to her the ballad of Florian and Jonquil, fair maids of summer and seasons of my love, two hearts that beat as one. Shella sang of all that was lovely and kind and good, all the songs that Shella knew Lysa loved. Even when Lysa finally slept soundly and deep, Shella sang on until she could think of no more songs that were lovely and kind and good. As the last note faded out, Shella rose to meet with Hoster. All the love and all the kindness and all the goodness Shella bore for Lysa had left Shella with the songs as the lady of Harrenhal went to talk to the man that almost killed Shella's niece in his greed. Shella strode into Hoster's solar where Hoster sat behind his heavy oaken desk. Shella kept her posture rigid and regal and her eyes glinted dark as the night that is ruled by bats. Shella's dress was as usual, form-fitting, and high-collared with long sleeves. It had wires in the back to support Shella's bosom. Her teats had not shrunk again after childbirth like her belly had, much to Shella's dismay. At times they caused Shella back pain already, however, Shella had not grown stout after the 5 times she had survived the women's battlefield like so many other women had. She had been lucky to be aging in grace and dignity instead of dying in the birthing bed. Unlike Shella's cousin Minissa, who had wasted away from the many pregnancies Hoster had forced on Minissa in short order, Shella still looked the picture of health. Her voluptuous frame was supported by strong but lithe limbs and topped with a finely chiseled face. True, Shella's behind had never gone back to how it was after Leon had been born, but her more voluminous derriere had never been to Shella's detriment. Many men who had only heard of Shella's beauty and seen her daughter's grace did not bother to notice the steel both women carried within them, only noticing both women's exteriors. Shella usually did nothing to dissuade foolish men from such thoughts, for no enemy was easier to turn or kill than an idiot besotted with Shella's assets, a smile or a simpering compliment. But still, those womanly weapons Shella only brandished against men easily beguiled, or the few men worthy of her attention. Hoster, fool he may be, had ceased to be either worthy of Shella or of being a man to be manipulated comfortably. No, Hoster Tully would be treated like the insect he proved himself to be. As Shella waltzed into Hoster's solar she did not give the servant a chance to announce her presence before entering. Lord Tully. After this wedding, or whatever this event with the Starks turns out to be, I will be taking Lysa back with me to Harrenhal. You have failed Minissa. I will not. Shella. I am glad to see you as well. After the wedding of Caitlin to the Stark Lysa will not go with you. With all these lords in attendance I will find an advantageous match for her. You may help me in that endeavor. Now leave. Imbecile that he was, Hoster lazily waved a hand at Shella as if she were someone to be shooed away. Hoster Tully did not even look up at Shella as he answered her. Shella could not help herself at that display of foolishness. She laughed at Hoster, sharp and scathingly. When the husband of her dead cousin finally looked at Shella, probably truly seeing her for the first time since Shella arrived, she replied. That lady went to you, Lord Tully, and you have lost my respect too much that I would extend the courtesy to pretend I was glad to see you. The lords you are trying to wed Lysa off to would want to see Lysa first I reckon. You are trying to sell your youngest daughter to them as a broodmare, and Lysa is in no condition for that task. Lysa looks the part of what you have done to her. Right now, you will find neither a lord nor an heir for her, Lord Tully. Give Lysa to me and I will see her happy. If she recovers and proves amenable, I might wed her to one of my sons. Not Leon, but for Minissa and for my niece I am willing to shield Lysa from disgrace. The Lord of the Trouts regarded Shella coolly for a second before answering. Lady Went it is, then. You will see I have no need for you after Lysa is either betrothed by the end of this week or en route to the capital to serve as lady-in-waiting to Princess Elia. I'll repeat myself, now leave. Shella looked at Hoster in silence. The blasted fool. 1 year past Hoster had antagonized the lions, this moon he had offended both the falcons and the wolves. Hoster's own lords were circling like vultures since Hoster deemed his children too good for them, and deemed their loyalty owed. Shella could tell him the truth of that, even in words Hoster would understand. Hoster could still make moves to save his family, his house, his seat. Probably the window of opportunity for that was open until the Starks arrived, until Ricard made to fillet the fish before Shella that was Hoster Tully. Instead, Shella turned around in silence. As Hoster said, Shella did not have need of him. Shella would save Minissa's children herself after their father left his legacy in shambles. Shella knew she would not lose any sleep over it. Shella left Hoster Tully behind in his own solar, leaving without another word. Over the next few days more lords arrived and Shella and Linya watched on as the pageantry of houses grew and banners increased. The old lion outright bought an inn at a nearby village, his disdain for Hoster clear for all to see. Alistair Florent came to ingratiate himself with the lords close to the Gold Road, at times even sucking up to Hoster himself. Hoster Tully was smirking at Shella then like an idiot, no doubt thinking of the fox's unwed heir as a consort for Lysa. Lackwit, to try to meddle in the reach now of all time. Old Lord Free came as well, an unwelcome surprise. His newest wife was left behind, nursing their youngest daughter who had been born less than 20 days ago. Specifically, Walder Free left behind his 6th wife and his 23rd true-born child. To top it off, Bethany Rosby was dying from birthing little Roslyn Free. 7. Walder Free was a revolting man, already leering at Shella and Linya the whole time he saw them. As if Shella would ever forgive the old weasel for Sria. The repulsive man did not even mention his 5th as he asked if Shella's daughter or one of her sons were looking for a partner. No, Shella quickly moved to extricate herself from that discussion with Walder Free. Baylor and Garth Hightower came uninvited but not unwelcomed. Shella was unsure how they had made it to Riverrun so fast, probably by ship to Lannisport. The biggest upset however, arrived a day before the wolves themselves. A runner came into Riverrun from the Whispering Woods to announce the newcomers, and an eerie silence spread amongst the Riverlords when they heard the news. But then again, their kind were never welcomed here, especially since they'd been thrown out of the Riverlands near 3 centuries ago. For Shella, however, all these eligible elder bachelors opened up a new question even. Maybe it was time to trade up from Walter. With now 5 unmarried lords paramount in attendance, the lines of the war would be drawn here at Riverrun. Of course, Hoster could never be a viable marital prospect for her and Robert Baratheon would never be a good prospect for anyone from what Shella knew. Still, with Lyra Stark, Joanna Lannister and Myril Piper dead, Shella was going to have the pick of a husband between the wolf, the lion and the kraken at this gathering at Riverrun. Because when Quayan Greyjoy and his 3 eldest sons arrived for the wedding unannounced without a single person expecting them, Shella knew the coming days then and there would set the course for the war to come. Shella could only lament her husband Walter for the fool he was once more. Riverrun was, without a doubt, the place to be right now. Notes. Kick-ass MILF #2 enters the fray. Did anyone expect it to be good old Shella? I'll be having fun with her. Already she's muddying the waters for both Ricard and the other players we know. Also, just FYI, the words of House Grandison arouse me not. I'd contemplated it for the title but then again, such a splendid match is so much more acerbic. And so much better than just a throwaway joke for the title. Tell me your thoughts on the title and the whole chapter. Also, as I said, releases will slow now. I'm neither setting a pace for myself nor will I bind myself to a regular schedule. Chapter 10, but it cannot change a woman's nature. Notes. Title quote. Love is sweet, dearest Ned, but it cannot change a man's nature. Lyanna Stark, A Game of Thrones. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. It had all spectacularly gone to shit. That was not really surprising to Oswell, he had been cautioning against such a development from the moment the prince had revealed his plan. If you could have called whatever that crazy dragon in need of 2 additional heads thing was a plan. However, this progression of events was something no one could have expected, not even Oswell at his most sarcastic moments. Casual insanity was not surprising to Oswell anymore, actually. After all, guarding a pyromaniac lunatic was Oswell's job. However, it was sad to see the slated successor for Aerys' royal position was just as crazy as the current king, even if that insanity was of a different kind. Really, to spirit away the only Stark daughter because she longed for freedom from her betrothal, what was Rhaegar thinking? And that was already bad enough, but promising Lyanna Stark princely intervention with her marital problems only to slowly start putting the moves on the girl to have a half-bred mark down the line was ridiculous. Lyanna Stark wasn't even that pretty and, by the 7, the girl was 15. Prophecy, my ass. Rhaegar's cravings just did not lie with his adult wife. Lie with his wife, Rhaegar, what a joke. Why could there not be a sensible royal in Oswell's generation? But no, Oswell had to pull the short straw with his pick of Targaryens. Any of the 5 kings before Aerys II were at least untainted by their blood's madness and now it happened twice in a row. Well, come to think of it, Jaehaerys II restarted the whole incest thing and in doing so broke marriage contracts with the Tyrells and the Tullys. And Aegon V burned most of his family at Summerhall. 7 be damned, seems like Kingmaker was the last really good king. Wait, didn't Maker become a kinslayer by killing his brother? Fucking inbred lizards. Still, not since the reign of the unworthy were the ruling Targaryens this bad. Mad King Aerys with a boner for burnings, and now Crown Prince Rhaegar showed his stiffy for smoke and mirrors. And children, apparently, depraved ephebophile that Rhaegar was. Lyanna Stark had even smaller tits than Princess Elia. Luckily the prince was not used to wooing the fairer sex and had not managed to bed the child since they whisked Lyanna away from her guards. Even if Oswell expected it wouldn't have taken much longer until Prince Rhaegar managed to bed the fool girl. Well, that was before the rider from Blackhaven had come in, at least. Oswell only had to read the letter the rider carried once to know that Rhaegar was going to have a harder time getting into Lyanna Stark's pants now. Ha, pants, because the lady hated dresses. With Drold's letter in hand, Oswell interrupted one of Rhaegar's and Lyanna's many rendezvous under the blackened roofs of Summerhall. When he told the Stark maid of her father's and brother's close brush with death, the girl just wanted to go home to Winterfell. Finally, at least one of the fools that Oswell was guarding came to understand that their actions had consequences. It was to the shame of the prince that it was not him that understood, but Lady Lyanna. The 15-year-old girl was evidently quicker on the draw than the 23-year-old prince trying to seduce her. Before Oswell had even finished reading out the letter, Lyanna Stark went to saddle her horse. And then Prince Rhaegar ordered Oswell to restrain Lyanna by force. How romantic. Rhaegar's words were nauseating. I had wanted to do this without force, my she-wolf, but I need a third dragon and Elia cannot give me a Visenya. Oswell, hold Lady Lyanna down. I'll tell Arthur to guard us while I save this realm. You are my ice, Lyanna, in time you will understand the necessity of this. And oh, how the screaming had started. Poor little girl, escaping from a whoremonger into the arms of a rapist. Lucky for her that Oswell read out the rest of the letter Drold sent instead of following the prince's orders. The rest about the threat of the crown prince's disinheritance if Lyanna Stark was harmed. And suddenly Rhaegar was not sure about Lyanna being his ice anymore. Whatever that meant. However, there had obviously not been mending any bridges after between the wolf and the dragon. Prince Rhaegar tried to gloss over his very recent and very casual threat of rape and smooth things over, but Lyanna Stark was having none of that. Even Arthur, drawn in by the girl's screams, had been aghast with his best friend Rhaegar. The Stark daughter sought Oswell's and Arthur's protection now. Ironic, in a way. If Lyanna knew of Queen Rhaegar's daily fate under the Kingsguard's watch. Well, Lyanna Stark would definitely not look at Oswell and Arthur the way she was now. Sometimes Oswell wondered, was their order of Kingsguards even an order of knights, still? But every time Oswell stopped himself from following that thought, that line of thinking only led to remorse and regret. The Dondarrion rider had departed the moment he had delivered his letter to Oswell, and now Oswell was finally about to leave this blasted ruin as well. Good riddance, the place gave Oswell shivers. Why Rhaegar always wanted to return to the halls of his family's doom was a mystery to Oswell, but then again, he wasn't really that curious about it. There was no reason to be found in the head of a Targaryen, it seemed. All was fine with Oswell if they could just leave Summerhall a second earlier. Looking at Arthur's grim face, the man agreed. Lyanna, while not opposed to the location, was now decidedly averse to the company of Rhaegar, and she looked itching to get on the road home again. Still, before their little group of four could finally be gone, the last resident of Summerhall had to step into their horse's path to block them. Of course. Fucking dwarf woman. No matter how much Rhaegar lent his ear to the witch's mummery, Oswell did not buy it. By now Oswell had passed Drold's letter to Arthur and taken the reins of Lyanna Stark's horse. They had specific instructions to bring the girl to King's Landing unharmed, and Oswell preferred to have the Sword of the Morning on exactly the same page as Oswell. Lyanna was likely to bolt the minute she had a chance to, and Rhaegar had proved himself erratic. Oswell was not going to risk either of his charges hurting themselves in their stupidity. When the white-haired crone with her blood-red eyes stood in their path, Oswell thought to ride the woman down, to kill this blasted twisted thing that haunted Summerhall since her Jenny died. Rhaegar always sang to the ancient woman, and the prince listened as spellbound as his grandfather Jaehaerys had. Mad fools, both of them, to listen to words which speak of royal destiny. But before Oswell could spur on his horse, Prince Rhaegar commanded Oswell and Arthur to stop in their tracks. As the ghost of Summerhall spun her story of destiny again, Oswell wished he had simply ignored the prince's order to hold his horse, that Oswell had just followed his first impulses. Because the crone's words were a poison the prince did not need. Stay, Prince of Smoke. I dreamt it. I dreamt a bed of blue roses, drenched in fire and blood. The child you need, not the child you seek, will come forth there. There would be grief in the birthing bed of your child, just like you were born in grief, Prince Roriger. The wolves' pack reduced down to 2 members, the dragon brood as well, and 1 child more to combine both lines, born of ice and fire and salt and smoke. I dreamt it. But if you abandon your path now, Prince Roriger, the future becomes uncertain. All I know is that the last vestiges of magic may wane. The oldest monster in the north chafes under his bindings. If he is not delivered his promised foe, old signs may become worthless and winter may come early. Do not abandon your course, Prince Roriger, or the future will unwrite itself. The promised prince will vanish, dormant to come another day perhaps. But some promises cannot be broken, Prince Roriger, and your destiny will be of pain still. Beget the girl with child, Prince, and your suffering will not be worthless. You have entered into this world mired in grief, Roriger Targaryen, and mired in grief you shall leave it. That is the only thing that will not change. And just like that, the prince was wavering again. A few words from a charlatan, and all Roriger saw was a confirmation of his dreams. Fucking mad Targaryens. Oswell let go of the reins to Lyanna's horse in his hand and spurred on his own charger, but before Oswell could reach the little woman to chase her away, the ghost of Summerhall collapsed into herself. Right in the middle of her right eye there was an arrow shaft poking out, fletched of sentinel pine with raven feathers to steady it. Oswell turned to look at the perpetrator, and there Oswell saw that Lyanna Stark had leveled her bow on Prince Roriger, her eyes like ice and another arrow primed. No more blue roses for me. Lyanna Stark's voice was as cold as her stare. Arthur was too far to intercede. Oswell's horse was away from the prince as well, and it was facing a wrong direction besides. Oswell knew the prince would be dead if Lady Lyanna so wished it. They all had seen her hunt and she was a surer hand with the bow than either Oswell, Arthur or Roriger. Yet the lady did not fire her arrow at the prince immediately. A single tear ran down her cheek, but Lyanna Stark's hands did not tremble for a second as she spoke on. Tell me, Roriger. Was that what all this was about? You needed a broodmare, and I seemed easy and highborn enough. Was anything real since you promised me freedom from Robert, and to help mediate with my father to break my betrothal? Silent tears flowed faster while steady hands did not move an inch. These were the moments that Lyanna Stark shined radiant. Arthur had seen it, Oswell as well. The Northern Lady was not yet a beauty, but she would grow into one. Lyanna Stark would be more than just beautiful, though. She already had iron and fire and ice within her, strength and passion and will. Roriger was silent for a second before he answered. Not all was a lie. You are not easy, Lyanna, and together with Elia you two can be my queens. I will love you and I will be true to you. The girl laughed hollow in response. There had not been hope in Lyanna's eyes since Roriger casually threatened to rape her, but now Oswell could only see disdain shining in those steel-grey orbs. No one is less free than a queen, Roriger. The way you talk of me and of love, you are obviously not capable of it. You do not care what I want, you do not care who I am. Love is sweet, Roriger, but it cannot change a man's nature. Or a woman's, and all I yearn for is to be free. There was a forlorn yet wistful look to Lyanna as she said those words. It sounded like something reiterated. The moment did not last long. After it had passed, Lyanna seemed to remember the arrow she had pointed at Roriger's head, and her countenance turned razor-sharp again. Tell me, why should I not kill you, Prince Roriger? This was getting decidedly too dangerous for Oswell's taste. A war between the Crown and the Northern Coalition was not something Oswell could allow to happen, not with Drold's letter explicitly warning of Rickard Stark. So, Oswell slid out of his saddle and knelt to the ground, facing Lyanna. Oswell pulled his sword and rammed it into the earth in front of him before addressing Rickard Stark's daughter. Lady Lyanna. If you will have me, I will swear to be your shield until I can return you to your father. In return please spare the prince's life. If you were to kill him now, I fear you may spark a war between House Targaryen and House Stark, the same war your father just prevented. I will safely escort you through King's Landing and back to your home in Winterfell and will die in your defense should any wish to harm you on this journey. Be they my king, my prince or anyone else. So I will swear. But please, do not push all the 7 kingdoms into civil war with that arrow. Lionel did not even look at Oswell. Arthur did, though, and Roriger. Arthur understood, Oswell could see it as their eyes met. Roriger did not understand. Of course not, the prince was blinded by the principles of the Kingsguard, the sworn shields of the royal family. Roriger did not see that Oswell doing his duty in the only way possible in their current circumstances. Roriger's shock only increased as Arthur slid from his horse and knelt to Lyanna Stark as well, mirroring Oswell and also speaking of oaths and honor. Lady Lyanna, I stand by Oswell and will also serve as your sworn shield until you are returned to your family if you take the road through King's Landing with us. Please do not kill the prince. Arthur, Oswell. Roriger's voice was hoarse as he spoke, disbelief leaving his tone raw. You cannot serve another. You two are sworn shields of my family, you cannot be the sworn shield of someone else. Roriger, your safety is paramount. Arthur kept his eyes on Lyanna as he answered the prince's words. Oswell and I cannot protect you from that arrow with our swords. But we can protect you from the foolishness you've caused this way, Roriger, by ensuring you remain safe. This is the only way I can see Lady Lyanna trusting us. And right now, some distance from you would do me good, Roriger. I named you my king because I thought you different than your father. I do not want to trade guarding one rapist for guarding another. If I have to betray any of my vows, let it be those of the King's Guard before those of the knight. Roriger looked stricken at his best friend Arthur's words. Oswell had no sympathy for his prince as he followed with his own statement after Arthur had delivered his first. My king heirs to Targaryen commands me to see Lady Lyanna return to King's Landing unharmed and unspoiled. The direct order of my king trumps the direct order of my prince. What I am doing right now, Roriger, is saving you outside of my direct orders. Did you not accept me as your king, Oswell, when you helped me organize the tourney at Harrenhal? Roriger asked in return as his eyes were boring into Oswell. But Roriger would get no reprieve from Oswell. The King's Guard's answer that followed only left Roriger brooding and melancholic, just like so often. Roriger, I pledged to follow you as my king after you had ascended to the Iron Throne. After the great council you planned on calling at the tourney of Harrenhal. The tourney I helped you arrange for that express purpose myself, even at the risk of severely insulting my sister-in-law Shella. Tell me, my prince, how did that work out? No council was called. Instead you alienated the North and Dawn in one move. Your father spurned the lions and now I am banned from my ancestral land on threat of death by my sister-in-law. So, I continue following the king as I have, and you are not that king yet. And finally, the fool was silent. Defeated as well, probably, but Oswell did not look up to check on Roriger once since Oswell had knelt down. Lyanna's voice finally released Oswell and his brother Arthur from their crouch. Sir Oswell, Sir Dane. I agree to your proposals. Say your vows and I will lower my bow and release you once I am home with my family. Sir Arthur answered in unison with Oswell. Lady Lyanna Stark, I, Oswell went forward / Arthur Dane will shield your back and keep your counsel and give my life for yours, if need be. I swear it by the old gods and the new. And I vow that you shall always have a place by my hearth and meat and mead at my table, and I pledge to ask no service of you that might bring you into dishonor. I swear it by the old gods and the new. Arise. Lyanna replied to the 2 King's Guard without missing a beat. The 2 King's Guards rose and Lyanna did as she promised. As Oswell's eyes fell on the prince, Oswell saw that Roriger looked only disappointed and defeated, not angry. Never angry. Just like he always had when things did not go his way. On the other hand, Lyanna still radiated in cold fury, more threatening and more righteous in it than any stag Oswell had ever seen. You are lucky, prince, that in contrast to you I love my family. More than I yearn for freedom, more than I dread the fate of being Robert's bride. More than I hate you. But you will never understand that. The part of me that does not hate you pities you for that. Lyanna rode past the melancholic prince. Behind Roriger the diminutive girl stopped shortly, but only to spit at his horse's feet in contempt before spurring on her own horse again. Oswell and Arthur mounted their horses quickly and rode after Lyanna Stark, their prince following suit behind them. The 4 of them soon rode due north, setting their course for the Rosa Road close by Thornton. It had been 7 days after Ricard's trial when the letter from Gerald had reached them. Neither the prince nor Arthur knew that the letter had come from the White Bull, but Oswell had deflected all questions regarding the sender. Roriger still had tried asking a few times. Sometimes Roriger just acted as if the norms of conversation did not apply to him. As if privacy was not sacred before royalty. Oswell still remembered Roriger constantly asking why Oswell was more afraid of Shella than Oswell's own brother, seeing only that Walter was the Lord of Harrenhal. Roriger had not been able to perceive that Walter was not the man in charge of Harrenhal. Growing up with a suppressed mother and not caring about his wife had given the prince a skewed perspective of the power women sometimes held. Power they held even if they were unfit for it, Oswell had to concede, but they held it nonetheless. Oswell himself could not fathom why a woman cared for power. It did not fit their nature. Well, Oswell also could not always fathom why Shella had to be such a massive bitch, but such was life. When they reached the Rosa Road after 9 days of riding, they found an escort waiting for them on the edge of the Kingswood, just as Drold had written. They were all surprised to see said escort was Connington, except Lionel. The Stark had been as emotional as a block of ice their whole way back and did not even deign to answer the prince whenever he tried to approach. Before the Lord of Griffin's Roost joined them, Lionel had at least talked with Arthur and Oswell a little, even if the subject was either knighthood, their travels or Arthur's sister. Gods know what that was about. John changed the dynamic of their troop for the worse, though, and Oswell was glad the obnoxious Stormlord would part ways with them at the King's Road. Having his favourite sycophant around helped Roriger regain his usual air of aloofness and superiority, but the image of the perfect prince was now forever tarnished even in Arthur's eyes. Maybe the Dornishman's loyalty could be shifted now, a worthy matter to ponder on with Drold. The retelling of Ricard's visit to King's Landing had been in parts terrifying and hilarious. John seemed convinced the man was a brute, straightforward idiot. Oswell was silently of the opinion that in the Griffin Lord's opinion the straight part of that description was the saddest part of that appellation. Anyways, trusting in Drold's letter painted the picture of a man that was terrifyingly competent instead. The Lord of Griffin's Roost was not unused to court, tricking him displayed a proficiency in court mummery a northerner should not possess. Connington also managed to thoroughly alienate himself from Lionel Stark within seconds. With a greeting like his, that was no big surprise. So, that is the wolf bitch that has tried to seduce you since Harrenhal, my prince. Really? Just because Connington didn't swing that way makes all women wanton harlots. Smooth. Still, not even Roriger's abysmal choice of friends disappointed Lionel Stark as much as the prince's utter lack of reaction to the fate of his daughter Rhaenys. When Lionel told Oswell and Arthur how her own brother Eddard had been fostered away from home for 10 years, they had come to understand her visceral reaction to the prince's lack of the same. The woman had read the prince exactly right. Roriger was incapable of love. It was a sad thing to realize. They were well rid of the prancing Stormlord 5 days later at the crossing of the Rosa Road and the King's Road. The new addition to the party that was waiting for them there, though, was a surprise for all of them. This time, however, it had been a positive surprise for the Northern Lady. While she screamed as she dismounted and ran into the man's arms. The man wore the white and grey livery of the Starks. Oswell had not expected ever to see it, but Lionel Stark started crying. Not just silent tears that ran from stoic eyes. No, Lionel was bawling her eyes out, crumbled in the embrace of a rough northerner. When she had calmed again, Lionel introduced the whole party to Edwyle Snow, the captain of her father's personal guard. The man looked ready to murder the Lord of Griffin's Roost, who looked on the smiling and crying lady in Edwyle's arms with disdain. Connington was only lucky that Lady Lionel's comfort was obviously more important to Edwyle Snow than ending the Stormlord's life. The prince seemed only slightly less high on the shit list of the hardened guard, though Oswell was quite sure that would soon change. Connington tried to say his goodbyes with a flamboyant fashion, as if he were addressing the royal court still and not just 5 people of whom 4 could not stand him. However, the man was finally gone, so all was good. Lionel and Captain Snow rode a little apart from Oswell, Arthur and Roriger for the last 3 days until they reached King's Landing. Upon entering the city, they were all quickly allowed into the Red Keep. They had made it in time, Roriger would not be disinherited. Court was in session when they entered the throne room, but luckily there was no stench of burned flesh in the air. Yet. Oswell was glad to see that the 3 wisdoms that always stood at the feet of the king were truly dead. Their replacement seemed to be not as old and mostly trembling in fear of the king. Ares himself was cackling his shrill laugh as Oswell's party came before him. Gerald and Barristan were guarding the king. Oswell shared a brief nod with both of them, locking eyes with his mentor before reaching the start of the throne's dais and kneeling with his companions. While Snow chose not to stand with them, the Northmen instead joined the wider court. After leaving Arthur, Roger, Lyanna and him on their knees for 10 seconds longer than usual, Ares finally talked. "Girl. Stand." Lyanna did as told and Ares continued talking after looking at her for a second. "We don't know what our foolish son thought running off you, scrawny little thing. Roller whispers to us you ran away from your betrothed, our beloved cousin Robert. My warden of the north and my hand tell us you have been kidnapped and our son violated you. Tell us, Lady Lyanna, did our son kidnap you? Did our son rape you? Or did you just run into his arms like a wanton whore?" For a second the northern lady remained quiet. Oswell saw her eye the crowd, as if daunted to speak of her ordeal before the whole court. Oswell also saw Lyanna lock eyes with Captain Snow, who gave an almost imperceptible nod. Oswell had a very bad premonition at that. One that proved true as Lady Lyanna Stark answered King Aerys II Targaryen. "No, your majesty, I was not kidnapped. Your son lured me away from my guards with false promises, lies and mummery. Sir Oswell saved me from being raped by him. I stand before you unspoiled not because of the virtue of your son but because of the honor of your king's guards Sir Arthur and Sir Oswell." That was obviously a prepared line, but already the court was whispering. And Lyanna Stark's words were no lies. Aerys looked at Arthur and Oswell, motioning for them to rise, schadenfreude spilling out of his eyes and smile. "Tell us, Sir Oswell, Sir Arthur, does Lady Lyanna speak the truth? Did you prevent her from being raped at the hands of Prince Roger? We command you to answer us before the whole court." "Prince Roger. Not Crown Prince Roger." Oswell glanced at Arthur, who had noticed the same detail. Most telling was that Roger was still forced to kneel in humiliation. Arthur looked like he did not care about that. The Sword of the Morning would answer truthfully and completely. Oswell would have to as well. Fuck. Just like when they had sworn themselves to shield Lyanna, Oswell and Arthur spoke in unison. The last time they did it to protect the realm. Their words now would kindle the flames threatening to swallow the realm whole. Arthur's voice was pure steel, Oswell's resigned. "Yes, your grace, Lady Lyanna speaks the truth." Around them the court's whispers turned into shouts and the lords and ladies erupted into chaos. It had all spectacularly gone to shit. Notes. Woo-woo, update. I told you it would slow down, but even I did not expect it to be this slow. And finally, the big reveal on Roger and Lyanna. Now before you all go and bash me because the prince is not a dreamy boy band type dude and they aren't star-crossed lovers, remember. There was no force used in this scenario. Neither would it have if Gerald had not sent a letter. Still, in my opinion, locking Lyanna in at the Tower of Joy without medical supervision is both forceful and grossly negligent. So as a consequence here you have a mad king and a mad forward/detached prince. If you are rooting for the Targs, all aboard the Roller and Elia train. No promises on when the next chapter comes up. Chapter 11, Threat and a Smile, Terrible to Behold. Notes. Title quote. Every once in a very long while, Lord Tywin Lannister would actually threaten to smile. He never did, but the threat alone was terrible to behold. Tyrion Lannister, A Storm of Swords. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Lostar, I ride with you please. Rhaenys asked Ricard with as earnest an expression as possible at 2.5 years old. Of course, little son. But are you sure you do not want to ride with Shasha and Napa today? This is our last day on horseback, we will arrive at Riverrun later in the afternoon. Ricard had to suppress a smile while the little princess was pondering seriously on the matter. Everyone at camp knew that his son Eddard had become Rhaenys' favorite person in the world. Even Rhaenys' nickname for Ned, Napa, was a mix of Ned and Papa. Ricard was of the belief that Shasha, the Lady Ashera, had actively encouraged this development. Ned had proved himself a wonderful caretaker with the little girl and was just as captivated with the princess as she was with him. Eddard had been the first to call Rhaenys little son, a moniker every one of the riders for Riverrun soon adapted. Well, everyone except Brandon, whom Rhaenys gave the nickname Rapey after some creative nudging by Ashura. The Dornish woman had done her best to avoid Brandon, and where that was not possible, completely ignored his presence. Still, that did not mean she was above taking her revenge on Brandon in roundabout, but perfidious ways. After almost a minute of deep thinking, Rhaenys made her decision on who to ride with today, and Ricard was not at all surprised he was not chosen. "I ride with Napa." Not at all earnest anymore, the little girl was now giving Ricard her toothy grin, bubbly and happy as only a child can be. Rhaenys' smile really did warm hearts and lighten moods, the name Little Sun fitting her perfectly. Then the little girl changed from giggling to thoughtful again in a heartbeat. But Napa and Shasha in bed now. Gods, still. Ned always used to be the first to be ready in the morning. At least before meeting his ladylove, now Ned was rarely up earlier than necessary. Still perfectly on time to break camp, but Ricard was coming to doubt the lady's reason for sharing Ned's tent, of being that she only felt safe in Ned's presence with Brandon around. Still, it was a difficult subject to broach, and the tension between Ricard's two sons was high enough as is. But Ricard had been young and in love, too, and Lyra had not been shy about keeping warm in winter, even before hers and Ricard's betrothal had been official. With that in mind, Ricard had agreed to the lady's request to keep watch over the princess every second night after Rhaenys fell asleep. The little son was most comfortable around Ricard, only discounting Napa and Shasha. "And your tent is the best and most comfortable, Lord Stark, just right for a darling princess," Ashura had said to Ricard, as flimsy an excuse as Ricard had ever seen. True, Ricard's tent was the best and most comfortable in the camp, but the googly eyes the Lady Ashura and Ned shared belied her intentions. Ricard just hoped they were being careful. The clever woman also asked for her and Ned's tent to be stationed on the outskirts of the camp, with Brandon's tent on the direct opposite end. Obviously, the lady's apprehension was not gone, but the request had the added bonus of increased privacy for her and Ned at night. Still, Ricard noticed some of his men-at-arms occupying the tents in the vicinity of the young pair, throwing Ned either jealous or admiring looks, so Lady Ashura was probably a little louder than she thought. Though, Ricard did not have the heart to tell the young lovers to stop, and Ricard's men that were robbed of their sleep did not have the heart either, or the balls. Both Ned and Lady Ashura had proven themselves quite protective of each other, and vicious of tongue. Also, Ricard highly suspected, quite a few of his companions were now living vicariously through Ned, with their wives back in the north and on the road for so long. There were no other women riding with their group at the moment, and even Ricard had to admit, gods, what a woman Ashura Dane was. She was too young for him, sure, and Ricard was not of a mind to entice his son's love away from Ned. Growing older together with Lyra, even after she had now passed, Ricard had acquired more of a taste for seasoned women, so to speak. And if Ricard ever had to think of marriage again, well, he'd prefer a woman with a more ample dowry than Ashura Dane. The young couple just exited their tent as the precious princess bounced over to them to hug their legs before being lifted onto Ned's shoulders. There she promptly fisted his hair. His son as always set about taking down and packing up his tent without seeming to mind the girl straddling his neck. Almost like an established ritual now, after 10 days with the Vale party since Diari, some of Ned's tent neighbors came up to Eddard and gave him a few respectful shoulder claps. At the beginning one man had asked Eddard how he did it, only to be met with stony silence and a truly deathly glare. No one ever dared asking again. Eddard Stark was definitely no kiss and tell. It did not take long anymore for the whole camp to saddle up, and Ricard soon found himself approaching his heir and his heir's beloved for some important planning. Before Ricard could start talking, however, Rhaenys stretched out one hand towards him from her vantage point on Ned's shoulder. "Lost our hug." With a lazy smile, Ned took to directing his horse only by his feet, letting the stallion slow from a trot into an easy walk. As Ned arrived at Ricard's side, Ned lifted the girl on his shoulders up to seat her in front of him until Ricard was ready to take the princess. Ned never denied the girl anything. Ricard was already afraid his future grandchildren would be spoiled rotten. Princess Rhaenys was handed to Ricard soon enough, and she cuddled into him for a little before she began pawing at his beard with wide eyes. She liked doing that with all the Northmen, fascinated by their rugged facial hair. Most southern nobles tended to always be clean-shaven. Even King Aes, who had not cut his hair since the defiance of Duskendale, did not have a nice full frost catcher in his face. The king for the life of him simply could not grow a proper beard. Ricard, on the other hand, could not help but be a little prideful at keeping the most immaculately groomed beard in all of Westeros. It definitely had the Rhaenys seal of approval of the highest order. Despite his intentions, Ricard found himself playing and snuggling with the vivacious child in his arms for a while, riding quietly content alongside his son and Lady Ashura. Not since Benjen had been young had Ricard spent so much time playing with a little one so often. Oh, Lyra, if only. Ricard missed the sound of children's laughter filling the halls of Winterfell. Maybe again someday. A new marriage for him was definitely a powerful tool in the coming storm, even as he balked at the idea of anyone taking Lyra's place beside him. There was no strategically beneficial woman on the market at the moment. Lyra had been a flint on the maternal side, and his most important bannermen were in on his plans and supportive of southern alliances. Maybe Free would have to die soon. Other prospects were viable, too, like future Widow Roller or a Stormland's bride. Perhaps even a sister woman, but that would require a lot of concessions. No matter. Time for marriage came later, time for politics came now. Ricard addressed the bundle of energy in his arms and beard. Little son, I need to speak to Shasha and Napa. Who do you want to ride with? Fofo, Kylie, Uncle John. The princess switched from crestfallen to thoughtful to giggling in an instant again. I want Rapey. He taller. I fly. Ricard still cringed at the name. Ashura chortled beside Ned, suppressing a laugh. At least his new heir had the decency to look abashed, even as Ned's beloved remained entirely unapologetic at the withering look Ricard shot her. He understood Ashura, sure, that did not mean that Ricard had to like it. Regardless, Brandon might have to be part of the discussion, so he would not be able to look after the little princess. Not that he would be happy to, as Rhaenys only addressed people with her nicknames. So, Ricard replied. Sorry, princess, Brandon may have to talk with us, too. Ellie is rather tall, do you want to fly on his shoulders? Fly with Ellie? Yeah, let's. Apparently the exchange was acceptable, and Ned winked for Elbert to come over. As soon as the Arryn heir arrived, he quickly lifted Rhaenys onto his shoulders. The little girl once more turned to Ricard, even at 2 she could be prim and proper. Thank you, Lostar, bye. Lord Stark Elbert himself repeated with a trace of mirth to his smile and an inclination of his head as he took on the delightful burden that was the princess. As Elbert distanced himself from Ricard, Ned and Ashura to give themselves privacy, Rhaenys could already be heard humming her new favorite tune and asking Elbert Arryn to sing for her. She loved it when Ned or Ashura sang for her most, and Ashura gladly indulged Rhaenys in singing their favorite song. When the three of them were alone, Ricard finally had his chance to address what he approached the two lovebirds for. Lady Ashura, the next few days at Riverrun will be one of the key gatherings before the coming civil war. Can I convince you to excuse Brandon from his compulsory confession during our stay there? I will try my hand at a performance, and too much of a stain on Brandon's name beforehand may be damaging. Lord Ricard, of course that poses no problem, she said. May I fund a few bards to spread the word instead after our stay at Riverrun, in return? Scheming, shrewd woman she was. Ricard approved. Her answer would have left Ricard smiling if the subject of their talk had been an enemy. The warm violet eyes that regarded him could not mask the cold turning wheels he knew they hid. Ned's grey eyes were hard as iron as he spoke, his own concerns showing he learned well from him since they reunited. Father. You spoke of Hoster and how he declined to help you and brother. He will slide Shura. It was not a question. Ricard did not deny it. Eddard continued, in turn. Send a raven from Riverrun to Starfall, on the day after you accomplished your goals. Arrange my marriage. I will bear the slights towards my beloved in that case, as will she. I will not forget it. I will also not forgive Hoster Tully condemning you and my brother to your deaths. None may condemn Brandon but the pack leader, and Hoster is not worthy to sit in judgment of you. Despite his calm, Ned was seething. Hoster Tully was not in his graces, but his mask was impeccable. His lady looked upon him with such devotion, such love, and after a second as he caught her gaze, he returned it in kind. Ricard was not entirely opposed to Ned wedding Ashura, but his son could not have everything handed to him. Convince me, son. Why not a northern house, after this fiasco with the Tullys? What does House Dane offer the Starks? What the North? Ashura seemed ready to come forth and drown him in words, bursting already, as Ned took her hand and looked at his father. Calm, steady. Worthy. Ned could become great, Ricard knew it. His son's answer was well thought out. Since the betrothal of Brandon and my fosterage at the Eyrie, many northern houses started betrothing amongst each other. There aren't too many eligible daughters left. There are no Glover or Bolton daughters this generation. The Umbers do not have a single one for us either, not since Moore's daughter was taken when I was young. Leona Woolfield is now a Marndale, and they already have a babe. Donella Marndale married Harley's Hornwood a few years back. Harley's has a sister, Birina, but a connection to the North's important harbour and the North's most important house. In one generation, that is too much growth. Besides, I hear they are having talks with the Tall Hearts, to get access to both seas. Smart of them, and Ashura's and my planned arrangement with Starfall may interest them. Sybil Locke is an option, but then Grandmother Mana was of their house. The Locks are talking of a betrothal to one of the Glover brothers as well. We might just offend the masters of the Wolfswood if we break their betrothal. Besides, your marriage to Mother bound all the Flints and all the mountain clans to our house, another marriage to either is unwise. Arnulf Karstark has daughters, true, but his relation to Ricard is contentious. Lord Karstark will not thank us if I wed one of his cousins. The only other eligible woman is Daisy Mormont, and not for another 10 years. We need alliances now, and the Mormonts are our most loyal bannermen already. Besides, Daisy is heir to Bear Island at the moment, and Lord Jorah has so far proven to have a weak seed. Her mother Mage may not thank us for taking Daisy away. A better option is to wed Benjen to her and let their children carry the Mormont name. There is Barbary Riswell. I do not see her as an option. Honestly, father, I believe you and Brandon thoroughly botched out relations to both father and daughter of House Riswell. Either bind Barbary to Brandon or to the Dustins. If I take her for a bride now, we will only appear weak. I say better we pay the Riswells off or bind them in the next generation. Besides, if we show our banners that insolence like that of Lord Riswell is rewarded, we will have problems with ambitious lords for generations to come. And as you taught us, father, every good lord is ambitious. Among the northern houses, that only leaves the neck. My friendship with Howland Reed is unshakable, and besides, the Lord of Greywater Watch is a friend to Lady Ashura as well. He will support our marriage. After that Ned fell into a short lull. Ricard had rarely heard his son speak so many words at once. Ned truly was fond of the Lady Ashura, there was no denying that. Ricard's son continued speaking, grasping Ashura's hand just a little tighter. As for a Vale Bride, I thought it might have been your intention, seeing how you send me to the Eyrie to foster. But the Lord Paramount of the North marrying a bride from the most Andal kingdom. That could terribly upset our bannermen. Only a Royce or a Redfort would work. However, just as in the North, there is no Redfort daughter of suitable age for me. There is a R'yla Royce somewhere, but she is from a minor branch. Also, seeing you and John, I have come to the conclusion that you sent me to foster at the Eyrie for a different reason than marriage. Even if I do not know yet why. His son was watching Ricard. Ned's assessments were right for the most part, even if Ricard had bigger plans for Benjen than wedding him to Daisy Mormont. Ricard was surprised though, Ned did have a better head for the marriage web of the North than Ricard expected. But maybe that was attributable to Ashura by Ned's side. Such a keen eye would speak in her favor. The support of the Lord of the Crannog men was to Ned's boon as well, and provided a small surprise to the Lord of Winterfell. Few bannermen were as loyal as those of the Crannogs, and the Reeds were held in high esteem throughout the North, even if they were reclusive. Ricard's son had been preparing for this conversation, obviously. And yes, there had been deeper considerations for Ned's fosterage with House Arryn. The affection John now bore Ricard's son was only an added benefit. Still, Ned knowing the reasons could teach him a little. You are right, son. Your fosterage with the Andals served as a statement. I hear you sallied out against the mountain tribes, flying our banner. Seeing the direwolf ride against the clansmen was a symbolic measure to show a united front with the Valyman, as the tribes are the last pure first-man vestiges in the Vale. The Arins have always remained suspicious that we Starks had informants among the tribes and supplied them in their cause. Your presence in the fight against the tribes assuaged these suspicions. Suspicions which were true. The tribes were the Starks' informants, supplied through narrow passes only the mountain men knew and through shipments along the coast of the Bight by the Crannog men. Even now still, despite Ned riding against the clans, the Starks held their allegiance. Ricard had to strike a difficult balance and concessions had been made towards the tribes, paid in armor, weapons, and grain. However, that was a discussion for when they were away from their current company, and only if Ashura was bound more firmly to their cause. So, right now, that information was irrelevant to the matter at hand. You've listed reasons against other marriages for yourself. Why should you not marry into the Reach for grain, or the Westerlands for gold? Janna Tyrell is said to be bountiful herself and will bring a bountiful harvest. And then there is Cersei Lannister. The Light of the West, supposedly as beautiful as your Ashura. She would bring us all the gold and power of the Rock. What does a marriage to Ashura bring us that a marriage to these other candidates doesn't? Ashura almost looked scared as Ricard talked to him, but then she had not been part of most of the discussions Ned had been in over the last few days. Cersei was a viable option, even if Janna was not. Ned though. Ned almost bristled at Ricard as he spoke and as he answered. None of them hold a candle to Ashura or her beauty, and I have seen all three of them up close at the tourney at Harrenhal. But yes. Let us talk of what they could offer us. The Reach is a fool's investment right now, you said so yourself on our rides. Bountiful as Janna Tyrell may be, not all the grain in the world would be worth being drawn into the conflict in the Reach. But I guess that was just another of your tests, father. Ricard had to concede that point, Janna Tyrell had never been an option. And from what Ricard knew, Janna Tyrell was to her wedded sister Mina Redwine as Lysa Tully was to Caitlin Tully. Well, maybe not as about to be disgraced as Lysa, but a vapid twat nonetheless. As for the Lannisters, Ned continued, taking Ricard out of his thoughts, we might make our beds with them against Aes, but you cannot honestly tell me that you want Tywin Lannister to have a controlling influence on the future heir to the north. That is folly. Ashura must have seen something in Ricard's face at that, for Ned's tirade came to an abrupt stop as his lover squeezed his hand. Ned looked almost timid at that. Father. You cannot mean to. I can, son, Ricard interrupted Ned for the first time, a little irate, your words just no. That reeked of sentimentality. Do you truly believe I would let Tywin Lannister have a controlling influence over you and your children in the north? I do not know if I should be insulted by that. Ricard did not speak loudly. He had long learned that a quiet voice was more threatening than a raised one, and Ned was now learning the same. Ricard's son looked a little ashen at the thought. We can revisit Cersei later, Ricard pressed on, dragging Ned along. For now, give me an argument for your marriage to Ashura. Not just arguments against your marriage to another. Ned took a moment to recollect himself, and Ricard saw his son drawing strength from the woman beside him. As Ned started speaking again, his voice was steady. Good. A connection with Starfall gives us an entry to the Dornish market for timber, a good highly in demand in the desert. For the marriage contract we can negotiate for preferential treatment and port fees for Tall Hearts, Glovers, Mormonts, Marndalis and other houses. We strengthen House Stark by strengthening our bannermen. They will thank us for that. It also has the added bonus of the development of the town on the Torrentine, preparing it for a time when the Arbor and Old Town get embroiled in the civil war and their harbors become too unsafe. That was a rather good argument for a Dane alliance aside from silly sentimentalities. The port of the Arbor would probably not be as imperiled as Old Town. That would only be the case if the Red Wine fleet stood against the Royal fleet on opposite sides. However, as soon as the Arbor gained significance as a military command center for the Navy, northern timber could be seized on the Reachman's docks for the war effort. Starfall was a good option for southern trade relations. But it also had glaring disadvantages. Ricard caught himself in his own musings. The two lovers in front of Ricard were looking at him in growing trepidation. Ricard could not assuage that worry immediately. So, he laid out his largest misgiving. Starfall is a long way from home, Ned. We do not trade a lot that far south. The result might not be worth the effort. Ned looked grim at Ricard's words, and Ashura was clutching Ned's arm so tight now that she was almost drawing blood. Ricard's son turned to look at his love, as if to find something in her face. Strength. Resolution. Ricard was not sure exactly, but it looked as if Ned found it. Ricard saw as his son slowly untangled his hand from Ashura's to press a whisper of a kiss to her knuckles, more tender than any Ricard had ever seen. Then, Ned whispered something into the lady's ear before she rose and slowly left. Ned looked after her, vulnerable and impenetrable at once. Brandon once asked me to break his betrothal to Caitlin Tully, Ned. He wanted to wed Barbary Riswell. So, I asked Brandon, what could the Riswells offer us, to rival the armies of the Riverlands and a bulwark against the Golden Tooth. Ricard took over the conversation as soon as Ashura had stepped out of hearing range, speaking softly to his new heir. At that, Brandon should have questioned why I needed security from the Lannisters. He did not. Instead, Brandon spoke of love. He was 15. 15. Brandon had no business speaking to me of love then. I denied him. Of course, I denied him. So, Ned, tell me. What does your marriage to Ashura Dane offer us, that I should forego the chance of forging an alliance with Tywin Lannister through your marriage to his daughter Cersei? Ricard met his son's eyes, grey on grey, as steel on steel. Just for a moment, Ned looked older. Wearied. Cold. Not as much as if something had broken in him, truly, more like something cracked. Good. Ned talked, quietly. Almost too silent to understand. Ned did not look happy, then, as he talked. My marriage to Ashura will splinter the Dornish faction in the war to come, or at least sow the seeds of doubt in the Martells that the Danes may not be loyal to their prince anymore. That would deny Dornish spears free use of the Prince's Pass, as the Martells cannot risk being held up in the Red Mountains. It might also make it easier for us to win over Dorne after the dust has settled. Ned did not shrink away under Ricard's scrutiny. Ricard felt a grin steal onto his face, slowly, unstoppable. Predatory. That, Ricard answered Ned just as quietly, is a good reason. Ricard stayed silent after, once more. He could admit to himself, a marriage between Ned and Cersei Lannister carried risks. Risks not present in a union with Ashura. While House Dane was an old one, they simply did not carry the power to rival House Stark in a true negotiation. With the Lannisters, larger concessions would have to be made. It would be a gamble, to offer Ned for Cersei. Still. Now is the time to bring up any more arguments for your suit, Ned. I love Ashura, father. I know that alone does not sway your opinion. But, between possibly marrying Cersei for a good reason, and definitely marrying Ashura for a good reason and for love, which brings House Stark more, you would pursue desire over reason, Ned. The possibilities a marriage to Cersei Lannister bring, and the possibilities a marriage to Ashura bring, are incomparable. You know that. No, father. I would pursue desire over ambition. Ricard waited. Wait. Ned did not elaborate, did not need to. So, Ricard named his terms. You will continue learning to rule at my hand. I will, father. Until it comes the day that you assume my mantle, you will obey me in all I ask. You may disagree. You may complain. You may ask for forgiveness, after. But you will obey. I will, father. For Ashura, always. There was a break in their conversation, and the silence was a harsh one. But it was not malignant. Fuck Hoster Tully. You have my blessing, Ned. We will send a first proposal from Riverrun, to Starfall and to Princess Elia for endorsement. I will also write a first draft of your marriage contract and send it with a few trusted riders south today. Now, you may go and bring your betrothed before me. Ned did not thank Ricard profusely, no. Ned simply rose and returned shortly after with Ashura in tow, their lips almost scarlet. Daughter. Ricard turned towards Ashura, who seemed almost ecstatic, no, giddy, as Ricard addressed her fondly. It was a stark contrast from his stern demeanor earlier, but Ashura was to be packed now, after all. Please write your own letter of endorsement for your betrothal to Eddard. I expect the wedding to happen as soon as possible, ideally before war breaks out across Westeros. Thank you. Father. Ashura's reply was happy, yet tentative, as if she were trying out the new appellation for Ricard. At the fond smile she received in return, Ashura's face almost burst. And when Ashura turned towards Ned, looking at Ricard's son in adoration, it just felt right. Ricard briefly wondered, if Brandon had been able to answer his questions adequately back then, would Ricard have broken the betrothal to the Tully daughter? Was there an adequate answer Brandon could have given, comparing the benefits of a Riswell and a Tully wedding? Ricard did not know the answer himself, and it just felt wrong. The rest of the ride no one tried to approach the young couple, lost in their own world as Ned and Ashura were. Only little Rhaenys entered their little bubble without problems. The two even disappeared for a private lunch together at noon, and they looked properly mussed when they returned. Ricard did send them a disapproving glare, but he was under no illusion about their relationship. Ricard was certain at that moment, though, that the wedding could not wait to be long after a few exchanged letters with Starfall and King's Landing. The riders reached the outskirts of the village outside Riverrun before dusk, and Ricard's guard alerted him to a man of the small folk expecting him. Perfect, just as planned. Ricard took Ned along with him to where the man was cordoned off with bread and salt by some of his guards. Ricard's men-at-arms quickly vacated the premise and guarded the vicinity as soon as they saw Ricard approach. As they approached in their direwolf livery, the small folk man introduced himself to the Lord of Winterfell and his heir. "I greet Cregan's Get. I'm Tom." "Cregan's Get greets you, Tom. Who came to Riverrun for my son's wedding?" Ricard regarded the old riverman shortly. A fourth-generation seedling, by Ricard's estimation, probably one of the network leaders in the area. The man's name was definitely not Tom. He was dressed to look as nondescript as possible, smudged, and dirtied. That could have been on purpose for this meeting, though it was just as likely Tom's normal appearance owing to the side occupation Tom lead here. Maybe as a farmer, from the look of him. Tom continued speaking after he had been acknowledged, his sentences short and to the point. "The Riverlords have arrived in force. 4 surprises are among them. Old Man Walder himself came down from the Twins. Jason Mallister declined to be hosted by the Trouts, he camps on the north of the Tumblestone. Lord Went is not in attendance, his wife is. One of us Cregan's men rode in Lady Went's retinue, she showed herself the real power in Harrenhal. Word from the castle is, she had a break with Hoster. The Blackfish is on her side, though, and Lord Blackwood may have joined the ladies' camp. Though, Blackwood seems to be not entirely entrenched, yet. Those news were interesting." Jason Mallister stayed his hand at Ricard's recommendation and Jeffrey's endorsement. Walder Free could prove a pox to anyone. Stephen Free alone would have been preferable, but as troublesome as the Lord of the Crossing could be, he was not stupid. A public break between House Went and House Tully, though. This was either about Lysa, in which case the Lady Went could probably be exploited, or there was a deeper game afoot. With the lady making a power play here, Ricard wondered if she would send someone to approach him now that Ricard had entered the field. Her family was not to be discounted, despite the Went's recent rise to power. Harrenhal had chosen the location for his castle wisely back in the day. Even if the Wents had not held Harrenhal for long, the lands belonging to them were fertile and strategically important. Harrenhal also fielded one of the bigger armies of the Riverlands. Lady Went presented an unknown in the wider game, and unknowns were always the most dangerous. Lord Blackwood attaching himself to the Lady of Harrenhal was not a surprise, though. With Stonehenge on one side of Blackwood lands, only a fool would suffer an enemy behind them as well. Titos Blackwood not being a fool was neither a threat nor a boon yet, though it could develop to be either. Still, the domestic Riverlords were the less important guests to the wedding. Which ones of the big players had arrived? Tom continued as Ricard motioned him to go on. "We have some surprise guests from outside the Riverlands. Lord Lannister has arrived with a sizable retinue of family and lords." "Which ones?" Ricard interrupted Tom shortly, who then elaborated on the information. Lord Kevan was not amongst the Lannister host, however, Lord Tywin's sister Lady Jenna Free and his third brother Lord Tiget are with him. Lord Aemon Free has joined the host of his father Walder Free, even as his wife Jenna stayed with her brother. Lord Westerling has joined Tywin together with his wife's family, though so far, we have not been able to ascertain if House Spicer has a larger objective at play here. Leffords, Bainforts and Cricklehalls have sent heirs and second sons, but no ruling lord to accompany the host. The Westerland houses have taken up residence at the running river inn on the edge of the village and rented out the entirety of their rooms. Tywine, Jenner and Tijet. Tywine, the strategic mastermind, Jenner, his political silk gloves, Tijet, his primary military tactician. Ricard expected an interesting and hopefully fruitful discussion with the Lord of Casterly Rock. Of the other major lord currently amongst the Westerland host, Lord Westerling, Ricard knew only little. Oh, Ricard was aware that the Westerling house continued its decline under the man's rule, and that Lord Westerling had married the daughter of a merchant's house just recently elevated to nobility. However, it bothered Ricard that he knew even less about this House Spicer than House Westerling. Up jumped merchants, new money. Not that there was anything bad about that, but those types were unlikely to be subtle players of the game. The problem of their kind was that you could always make big waves with enough money. Sometimes, those waves revealed the true monsters hidden in the deep. Even without a foundation, Ricard intended to keep an eye on House Spicer. Tom talked on. There have been a few smaller houses of the Reach arriving, but they all follow in the wake of either the heir to Hightower or Lord Florent. The Tyrells are absent save for a few knights from minor branches in the retinue of Lord Baylor. Apparently, Lady Aeleri is having a third child and the matriarch of the Roses has decided against leaving her son alone to travel here. Tom hesitated after saying this. The news were rather interesting, and knowing of Lord Mace Tyrell, the Queen of Thorns probably did choose the prudent option in staying behind. Leaving the man without supervision when a war could start any moment could be recipe for a disaster. Only spies from her, then. Still, did Baylor Hightower come on the command of the Tyrells, or did Lord Lytton go independent? Maybe on the advice of Lytton's uncle Drold, as well. Something to talk with Wallers about. Winterfell's Maester despised his mother's house. Ricard's informant still seemed to be on the fence about something. Tom only spoke again on Ricard's urging. There was a big upset just yesterday when the Ironborn emerged from the Whispering Wood in force. Quayan Greyjoy knocked on the gates together with his 3 eldest sons and the lords or heirs to Blacktide, Drum, Goodbrother, Harlaw, Awkward and Saltcliffe. Such a wealth of Ironborn nobility has not entered the Riverlands at once since the days of Harrin the Black. Unsettling. Ricard did not know what to make of that. What did the Kraken want, ever grasping? Ricard knew one thing, the Ironborn were not invited by House Tully. Hoster's lords would be in open rebellion now if that were the case. Should Ricard approach the Lord Reaper of Pike, or wait for the man to come to him? Ricard had heard good things of Quayan Greyjoy, and the man had proved a smart steward to his people. More restrained, more in control, more intelligent than the Reapers before him. More dangerous. Another asset or another threat? By now, Tom was fidgeting in his place. Despite probably having been an informant since before the Ninepenny Wars, nothing of such import had happened in the Riverlands during that time. Tom had likely gleaned to understand the game a little, and the man knew something was approaching. Ironborn in the Riverlands. Madness. Ricard could read it all in Tom's face. The man was afraid for his life, uncertain of the future and presented with many a sign of danger. But he was Ricard's man, so Ricard spoke to ease his worries. Tom. A war is coming, and it will be fought throughout the 7 kingdoms. I do not know what the Ironborn want. I have an idea what Lord Lannister wants. I know for certain what Hoster Tully wants. I will know more before I leave here, and I will tell you what is safe for you to know then. You have been loyal to the Starks are loyal to you. If Hoster Tully goes to war in the Riverlands within the year, follow him unless he goes against known allies of mine. For now, that means House Mallister. I fear with the Reachmen here, Lord Tully will try to meddle in the south. But, if Hoster Tully intends to cross the Gold Road, he will lead most soldiers following him to their deaths. Abandon him if he does so, and come north if you are discovered with your network. The descendants of Cregan's host will be given a hero's welcome when they return north after more than 150 years of leal service. Thank you, my lord. Is there any other way I and mine can be of service? Tom replied relieved. Yes, Ricard answered, handing Tom a letter and a bag of gold dragons. This letter details information regarding Lady Lysa Tully's recent abortion, forced on her by her father. Starting tomorrow at noon I want your men to spread the truth in all the brothels and wine sinks and inns around. My guards have informed your brothers in all other parts of the Riverlands, the Northern Reach and the Western Crown Lands to do the same. Soon, the whole realm will know. That is all. Cregans thanks you for your service. Ricard released the Cregan's man before him with the customary dismissal, and received the customary reply. I thank Cregan's for the fire in my hearth in winter. Tom disappeared quietly soon after, taking the letter and the gold with him. Ricard would see him again before he left. Now it was time to meet the other players. One of Ricard's senior guards was sent to Riverrun to inform the Tullys that Ricard would not enter their keep before noon the next day. The guard was to tell Hoster explicitly that the advance warning was meant to give the Tullys time to prepare for the reception of Ricard, his heir Ned, and his other son Brandon the groom. Ricard and Ned reconvened with John at camp. They agreed to head for the Running River Inn at once, with Elbert coming along as well and a few guards of both House Inn and House Stark for protection. The men at arms the four met along their way were mostly clad in red and gold, and there were more and more soldiers the closer they got to the inn. There was one very notable exception between all the Lannister men, though. A tall Ironborn was standing not 50 feet away from the inn where the Lannisters dwelled, with two men holding the golden Kraken banner of House Greyjoy behind him. The man was tall, grey of hair and beard and with a scar splitting his mouth vertically in two. Dagmar Clefture in all his glory, the second most famed and dreaded man of the Iron Islands alive, only surpassed by his liege. And now he stood directly in Ricard's path towards the lion's den. As soon as he saw them Dagmar addressed the falcons and wolves on their horses. Lord Stark and company, the man said with a curtsy that was neither practiced nor easy. The move looked comical on the giant. Ricard wondered which of Dagmar's companions had told Dagmar to perform a curtsy. Ricard had to fight to keep up a straight face at the sight. While it was likely that whoever had told Dagmar to curtsy instead of Bo had played a joke on Dagmar, it would not surprise Ricard either if the Ironborn simply did not know that only women curtsied. Either way, Dagmar obviously did not like being here, scraping before Ricard and John, scraping before anyone. I am Dagmar Clefture, envoy of the Lord Paramount of the Iron Islands. Quayan Greyjoy, the Lord Reaper of Pike, invites you to speak with him at your convenience, my Lord Stark and Arryn. You will be welcomed at our camp with bread and salt. The man, having said his piece, turned to leave. Clever of the Kraken. But sending a mouthpiece with limited instructions and limited diplomatic capability was as much surrendering initiative as grasping it. No matter if Quayan Greyjoy knew how to play the game, if his subordinates could not, it simply was not enough. And the Lord Reaper did not sit in a position of sufficient power to command the Warden of the North and the Warden of the East. A reminder, then, and a show of strength. Ricard Stark did not suffer to let Dagmar Clefture leave in silence. Captain Clefture. I will be speaking with Lord Lannister now, but I am willing to speak with your liege immediately after. At mine and Lord Arryn's camp. 2 of our guards will join you back to your host and accompany Lord Quayan and his advisors to our tents. Dagmar turned around again at Ricard's words, but he was not given the chance to retort. Spurring on his horse, Ricard continued talking in passing. As Lord Quayan will be forced to wait for us at our camp, our men will organize the most lavish food possible on such notice, and entertainment from the village as Lord Quayan requires. We look forward to seeing him later. At that Ricard had ridden past the stunned Iron Man, leaving Ricard's and John guards to organize themselves to his specification. The man-at-arms rotated into their positions with practiced ease as Ricard, John, Ned, and Elbert swiftly dismounted and entered the inn. Dagmar Clefture did not have time to reply. The inn was lit by the warm light of 4 hearths. Westerland nobility filled the halls. Ricard spied some soldiers of higher military standing on some of the tables, keeping apart from the more lavishly dressed lords and sirs. A few ladies were scattered throughout the hall. Above the others sat Tywin Lannister, the old Lion of the Rock, with his brother Tiget and his sister Jenna on either side of him. Tiget Lannister sat ramrod straight in his under armor, consisting of a chainmail byrnie cut like a shirt with a cloth cover in red and gold to fit a formal dinner table. He wore an unadorned sword by his side in a blank sheath, hanging over a pair of painted but sturdy boiled leather breeches. Tiget's boots though were standard issue plate, the same armor Ricard saw on the feet of the Lannister soldiers. The younger Lannister brother's eyes were on Rickard already as he entered the room, and the Wolf Lord saw a muscle twitch in his body before his brother Tywine looked up to regard him. Jenna Lannister's eyes found the group not a second after her brother's. However, her movements seemed entirely smooth and natural, as if she had always meant to look towards the entrance in that second. Whereas Tijet's posture screamed of discipline and training, and Jenna's languid ease belied a keen political mind, Tywine's body gave nothing away except perfect control. While Jenna Lannister's body at 37 was overflowing from her crimson gown in all the right places and her long hair flowed freely across her shoulders, her elder and younger brother both cut an entirely different look, even as Tywine and Tijet shared a few styling choices. Both men kept their golden blonde hair in a close military crop, and both did not sit against their chairs back. All three pairs of Lannister eyes had directed their green glare upon Rickard, but where Jenna's were of controlled warmth and Tijet's were of controlled cool, Tywine's eyes were of controlled apathy, giving nothing away. The Lion Lord himself wore a noble's doublet hinting at a muscular body with broad shoulders and firm waist. More red than gold, and the bloodiest red Rickard had ever seen. While his brother Tijet was clean-shaven, Tywine Lannister wore immaculately trimmed sideburns. Not a full beard as magnificent as Rickard, true, but the man did look razor-sharp and as dangerous as the edge that must have cut him. Tywine Lannister did not even need to speak to get the whole to quiet down. He merely knocked against the stein in front of him with the golden sigil ring on his right hand. Silence spread out in a wave from the high table, and all men turned to the lord above them. Leave. A single word from Tywine Lannister and all the people high and low left the hall quickly and orderly. Rickard could not help being impressed, and he could feel both Ned and Elbereth tensing up in their group. Jon stayed calm while the horde of Westermen parted around them to leave the hall. Already before everything around them was empty did Rickard start walking towards the raised dais, not willing to wait until Tywine would call their group over. On the high table there were already 4 empty chairs standing opposite the 3 Lannisters. Tywine had been prepared for them. Rickard sat down opposite the man and was pleased to find both bread and salt waiting for him and his companions. They all partook in silence. Your letter from the capital was a very welcome present, Lord Rickard. I had been appalled to hear how our king has treated you during your visit there. Not surprised, merely appalled. I am curious about your invitation to your son's wedding. I do hope you have something more pertinent to talk about though than Lord Eddard replacing his brother to be the new groom. Tywine did not even deign to grate them, as if his words were too precious to waste on such frivolities. The old lion shortly let his eyes linger on Rickard's son, though he barely spared Elbereth in a glance. Tywine's voice was the same as his poise, controlled, and polished sharp like a blade. Rickard replied with just as cutting a voice, cold and biting like winter winds. I highly doubt any betrothal between the Trouts and mine will survive until tomorrow afternoon. For you, however, that is largely irrelevant, Lord Tywine. I have not asked you to come to primarily speak of marriage. I have been slighted and betrayed by our king. The whole realm knows you have been slighted and betrayed by our king. Maybe it is time he stops being our king. Both Jenna and Tijet seemed caught off guard for a second upon Rickard's blunt words. Not Tywine, though. Tywine just looked at Rickard, controlled like always. When Tywine finally spoke, it almost seemed like he was threatening to sneer at them. And who is supposed to rule us if not the Mad Dragon? The prince, who to your benefit took off with your daughter. The Stag Lord, who is betrothed to your daughter through claim of blood. Why should I put your grandchild on the Iron Throne, Stark? Why risk my soldiers fighting your war? Tywine Lannister was always controlled. That served well in discussions, mostly. Some people dealt better with displaying the right emotion when called for. Where Tywine muted his sneer a little while talking of the Targaryens, Rickard did not bother to stifle his snarl as he spoke. I will not suffer the man who abducted my daughter to hold real power before he dies at my ministration. I will not leave a single dragon in power after they threaten to burn me and strangle my son. Why should I elevate a Baratheon on claim of blood to be my overlord when it is his dragon blood I despise? Rickard turned to the side simply to spit out as if he had bitten on ash to emphasize his point. No. The Iron Throne. The 7 kingdoms. 9 provinces. 1 royal dynasty. 5 up-jumped families fashioning themselves our equals for 300 years. What are they to us? The Tyrells, the Tullys, the Greyjoys, the Baratheons. The Targaryens. What are they to us? What are they to us? I say we see them spend themselves warring each other, and after they either bend to us or they will be obliterated. I say it is time the unified seven kingdoms are at their end. We bide our time for the lizards to kill each other and redraw the borders of the Reach, the Riverlands, the Crownlands and more. You tried to make your daughter queen. I will give you more. What say you, Tywin Lannister, King of the Rock? Rickard did not need to raise his voice. It did not do to scream of treason. Rickard knew the three he brought with him to remain impassive as he spoke. Jenna looked at him intrigued as Tivett was sizing him up a second time. Tywin, though. Tywin was given Rickard a tightly wound smile. I say we have lots to talk about, King in the North, things great and terrible. And they did. They talked for hours before Rickard left for the Kraken's he had invited into his camp. During the entire time they talked, Tywin continued wearing his threatening smile. Notes. Style shift for the first part of the chapter, followed by lots of setting up. It's going down next chapter. Woo-hoo. Also, adorable Rhaenys is adorable, intimidating Tywin is intimidating and the great Ned is great. Chapter 12, The Greatest Fools Are More Clever. Notes. Title quote. The greatest fools are oft times more clever than the men who laugh at them. Tywin Lannister, A Storm of Swords. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. Tivett rose slightly before dawn, as he had done since before Maelys Blackfyr tried to invade through the Stepstones and before Tivett had claimed his first kills at 10 years old. Back when the Red Lion had still been Tivett's hero. Back when Aerys II Targaryen was still a welcome guest at Casterly Rock. Back when Tivett and his siblings vowed to reclaim the respect owed to them as Lions of the Rock. They had done that, and more. Now House Lannister was again one of the preeminent powers of the Seven Kingdoms. As it always should have been. Tivett no longer worshipped the Red Lion, traitor and failure that Roger Rayne had become. Tivett no longer thought of King Scab as a friend to House Lannister. And since yesterday, a new vow had replaced the old one of merely reclaiming respect. It was time to reclaim a kingdom. With practiced ease Tivett put on his standard attire. Cloth, mail, padding, full plate. Where Tywin's armor was embossed in gold and crimson, Tivett preferred plain grey steel, polished to shine almost silver. To each the armor that served them best. Whereas Tywin did not fight at the front, as the leader he needed to cut a great figure. Tywin's image was his guarantor of safety when dealing with matters outside the battlefield. The few times that Tywin did take up the sword could not be allowed to diminish that. Tivett, however, needed steel he could trust. Steel he trusted to blind his enemies, so it was polished to perfection. Steel he trusted to cut through his enemies, so it was sharpened to perfection. Steel he trusted to shield him from harm, so it was forged to perfection. Trust in your tools, trust in your comrades, trust in your commanders. And because Tywin displayed the image of the perfect leader and Tivett showed the prowess of the perfect commander, their men trusted them. And in turn, Tywin and Tivett trusted in their men. The most valuable commodity there is, trust. Though commander in name, Tivett's heart was that of a soldier. Oh, he laid down the plans for battle and led in the van, true, but the only battles Tivett planned were the ones Tywin told him to. Tywin was the leader. Tivett was still in awe of the flood, still in terror at times. He was no visionary, only a soldier at heart. The best soldier. His sword's sheath Tivett clasped to his side, the pommel of his sword plain and carefully wrapped in well-worn leather. No golden pommels for soldiers. Tivett had always known that Jaime had craved a plain sword like his, no matter how much Tywin kept pressing golden blades into Jaime's hands. Still, to join the Kingsguard. Foolish boy. It would have just been a question of time. Tivett would have convinced Tywin in time, to give the boy space. Kevan was in agreement with Tivett, but as always, Kevan remained too quiet when confronted by Tywin. Jenna was in agreement with Tivett as well, but as always, Jenna became too vocal when confronted by Tywin. But Jaime's matter was a military one, and in matters strictly military, Tywin listened to Tivett. Even if it took Tywin some time. Time that Jamie had not left for himself and time that King Scab had now taken from them all. When Tywine had agreed yesterday to the wolf's proposal, he had been slightly displeased when Tijet had interrupted him. Only slightly. The fate of his heir presumptive, disregarding contrary oaths, had been on Tywine's mind all the same. But Ricard was the flood all over again. A commander, a visionary, not a soldier. For does an oath exist if that what it is beholden to exists no longer? There can be no celibate Kingsguard if there is no king for him to guard. No battle, just the flood. No release, disbandment. Tacticians and strategists. Of course it was a gamble, what they planned. But as with every gamble, the bank has the highest odds, and banks were nothing compared to the rock. Tijet still shivered at the things Tywine ordered done yesterday, after the wolves and falcons had left. A strategy to execute if Ricard Stark really did deliver today at Riverrun. And if it worked, if the alliance stood. Well, they'd have apex predators leading them, Pride and Pack united, with the finest flock their vanguard. Even a pit of snakes as their anvil was possible, though the odds on that were not yet final. The herd and the swarm did not have to be enemies either, though their reliability at least was still heavily suspect. They could make a good hammer, though. Good tools. But that was all for later. For now, Tijet loosened his muscles behind the inn. Slow swings, fast swings, wide swings, short swings. Repeat. Today, Tijet would face off against his brother-in-arms from Bloodstone. Repeat. The rider had been sent, requesting a spar around noon. Repeat. A friendly spar, in the training yard. Repeat. Not so friendly elsewhere, Tijet knew that. Somewhere close, a proper fight would take place. Not with blades, not just deciding the fate of one man. No, a fight with words, deciding the fate of thousands. But Tijet's friend knew none of that. Repeat. But it was not Tijet's place to worry about that. Tijet was just a soldier. A cog. A tool. Repeat. Dawn broke. Tijet would train for another hour. As ever. Repeat. 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 Tijet returned for a proper breakfast when he was done with his training, his brother and sister in their respective combat outfits at the table. Tywine more regal than their king, Jenna more enticing than for her husband. Tijet joined in silence, taking the bread and the stew offered. He'd had a little before warming up, but now Tijet felt famished. His cloth was drenched underneath his mail. Sweat and hunger, a good morning. The silence was comfortable between them as they ate. Before noon struck, news came in from other camps. The wolf and the falcon had been seen visiting the Lannister camp at dusk. The Crickens had visited the Northmen in the night, feasted at their tables until their hosts deigned to return. Early today the eagles had been reunited north of the Tumblestone, and the mother bat had visited the new arrivals together with the young raven. The reach had banded together, foxes making their dens between towers. Smaller lords dined with the fishes. Tijet could smell it. Oh, the smell. Blood, iron, and bonds forged and broken. War, it smelled of war. They might call it other, they might name a different date, after it was over. But Tijet, soldier to the bone, smelled it and felt it tickle his marrow. The war had started already, and no beautiful clothes and dresses could hide that from his nose. They left to arrive before noon. The Blackfish had agreed to the request for a spar. He was a friend to Tijet, though Tijet knew not for long. The betrayal would strike too deep. But Tijet's commander had no need for friends, only tools. And a soldier was a tool. Another soldier could only be the second best friend to Tijet. Tijet's best friend was his blade. But regardless, Tywine made no distinction between Tijet's first and second friend. To Tywine, all those were just tools. The Northman host was not far behind the Lannister host. Tijet could discern Ricard Stark at the front. The wolf's look was startling, even as Tijet knew what to expect. The carefully groomed and waxed beard of yesterday looked wind-blown and salted. It could never look poor, or scraggly, but today it looked wild, savage. The finer clothes of yesterday, the carefully treated leather of good quality, had been replaced with a traveler's gear that was well worn. And well fought in. Rickard Stark looked a northern savage that did not care a whiff for politics, or bootlicking, or the great game. He looked the way that Tijet had expected the Warden of the North to look like, before Tywine had shown Tijet Jaime's letter. Rickard's entire guard was not cloaked much different, only a mantle of rich wolf's fur put Rickard Stark and his sons apart from the rest. Aside Rickard, Jon Arryn and his heir looked the epitome of Andal knighthood, decked out in resplendent plate engraved with prayers and stars. Towering over their northern companions on their destriers, their shields strapped to their backs, the only thing the two groups shared was a grim countenance. Neither looked happy, neither looked cunning, neither looked dangerous to a lord in a castle. Perfect, honorable fools, all of them. Tijet passed the dry moat and the entrance to Riverrun behind his brother, Jenna at Tijet's side. Brynden Tully welcomed them at the entrance while his brother Hoster stood aside, waiting for the Northmen behind them. Tijet was perfectly fine with that arrangement, the younger Tully brother by far his favorite of the two. Tywine, however, would not let this insolence stand. No, this was an insult. Hoster had done that before, but slights against Tyrion, while not forgiven, were understood. This was disrespect. Fool. Lord Tully. Thank you again cordially for the invitation to your daughter's wedding. You must look forward to the joining of your house with one as noble as the Starks. Slight for slight. But Tijet knew his brother. The great lion, even behind his biting dry sarcasm for sarcasm's sake, was amused. Amused expectation was a mood his brother seldom found himself in. The Blackfish could not suppress a snort at Tywine's words. Join a house as noble as the Starks. Up jumped trouts, leaping from their river, belittled in their keep. One did not insult the lion, ever. Hoster Tully did not even spare them a glance as he answered Tywine, fixated on the looming shadow of the wolf crossing beneath the gate. Welcome, Lord Lannister, to my humble halls. Please, my brother has been looking forward to sparring with yours. Join them in the courtyard, would you not? The lords in attendance did not look comfortable. The slight tension between House Tully and House Lannister was known in the upper circles, people did just not expect the way both parties carried their slights. Tywine did not even care to answer Hoster as he gave a sharp nod, but no Lannister moved an inch as the big bad wolf dismounted and stepped up to the Lord of Riverrun. Bread. Salt. Bluntly spoken, eyes as ice. Tijet noted that the northern accent of the wolf's speech was more pronounced than yesterday when they had talked at the inn. Rickard Stark was not here to mince words and make merry, and all around knew it instantly. Cold fury, untempered by days on the road, radiated out from the Lord Paramount of the North. Hoster Tully was not happy at the affront. The implication alone was insulting, but still, not too outlandish for a savage. At Hoster's gesture his daughter approached. Lady Catelyn was dressed impeccable, her hair carefully braided to highlight her auburn tresses. She was, Tijet knew and recognized once again, undoubtedly, a true beauty. Rickard Stark took both offerings and ate a little before passing the tokens of guest right on to Jon Arryn, who had stepped up beside the Warden of the North. Only after Rickard had partaken in bread and salt did he show the girl before him a small smile. Rickard Stark even sounded kindly as he spoke, then. Lady Catelyn. It is a pleasure to see you once more. My son has been eager to meet you again. Brandon could speak of nothing but you since we left the capital, and of his regret to almost have lost you to his own foolishness. The girl's face slowly took on the color of her hair. Still her voice did not waver as she answered, her eyes glistening as she shot an infatuated look at her betrothed, who smiled at her as he dismounted. Thank you, father-in-law, you are most kind. I, too, have been counting the days. When I heard of my Brandon's sister being abducted, my heart ached for him. Still, I am happy that he has returned. To me. Poor girl. The world was not kind to you, it never was to those like you, Tijet thought. The eldest pup walked over to the eldest trout fry and leaned down to exchange whispers, the girl giggling in return. Brandon Stark was a handsome and charming young man. The two young ones made for a beautiful pair, or would have made for one. The wolf father smiled a fond smile as he looked at them. The eldest trout looked constipated, instead. Behind Rickard Stark, the true heir to the North helped the most beautiful woman from her horse, and Hoster Tully looked like he was about to explode. However, Rickard Stark seemed not to notice as he addressed his eldest. "Brandon, son, why don't you take your charming betrothed for a walk while us old men have a short talk?" Brandon Stark smiled from ear to ear as he nodded and grasped for the maiden's hand, pulling her along, and being pulled in turn. Caitlin Tully's face was one of pure bliss. Knowing of the wild wolf, Tijet remained unsure how genuine Brandon Stark's show of affection was. As soon as the pair was gone, Rickard turned to Hoster Tully, and the Stark's scowl was back on. Rickard did spare a short look for a servant, not contemptuous but harsh, and asked for a proper mug of ale to wash down the welcoming offerings. The servant scurried away in a hurry before quickly returning with a solid stein topped by foaming ale. When Rickard finally made to talk to Hoster again, contempt had crept into his tone. "Lord Tully. It is time we talked without all your southern layers of deceit and lies." "Where?" "My solar." Tully spat out the words like ashes. Rickard almost walked past him into the keep, just as a squire approached to take his weapon. After all, guest right had been accepted. Lord Bracken sucked in a breath and the old weasel released a cackle as Rickard Stark refused to be parted from his blade. Hoster turned a shade of livid red as he spoke in a whisper that sounded like a shout. "Stark. You are guest in my halls. Do you not trust my word? A poor showing, as we are to be family." The wolf barked out a laugh. "Tully. I had uncles I did not trust, and they never betrayed me. You left me to ride after my son, your son-in-law to be, without support as promised in our marriage contract as you scorned me when I tried to protect my Brandon. You fucking cunt told, your fool of a whoremongering son is riding to his death. I'll marry my Caitlin to your spare, instead. Young Eddard has not been promised yet, has he? I do not trust you, Hoster. I do not trust your word. The only reason I do not name you an oath-breaker is that, taking a note from your book, I will follow our contract to the letter. Fool you, to put into writing what we in the North agree to with our word as our bond. You will rue the day you screamed after me that I was as dead as my Brandon, and my Ned would be more pliable if he tried to recover our ashes." Rickard Stark's accent was slipping, his words becoming crisper and harsher and angrier as he spoke. The courtyard stood in silence. Vances, Brackens and Freys were silent, as were Diaries and others. They all watched the start of Hoster Tully's end. The absences were telling, too. Blackwood and Went and Mallister. Their lordly allies would inform them of what happened here in Hoster's halls, but that the Riverlords had not been there to stand with their liege to start with showed the Tully's position well enough. Ravens would fly, telling the realm. And Rickard Stark had just started his tirade. "Tully. You are lucky I have honor. You are right that I am your guest. So. Leave as many of my guards at your solar's door as your own while we talk, and I shall leave ice with my heir." With perfect timing Ned Stark stepped up to his father, the stunning woman in purple at his side. Star and sword. A Dane. Ashura Dane, looking up lovingly at the man whose arm she had taken. The younger Stark did not even glance at Hoster Tully, a smile playing on his lips as he gazed at the vision by his side. Every step and every breath an insult. Rickard took a sip from his mug and Tijet almost imagined the old wolf tried to hide a smile. "Agreed. Choose 2 of your guards and follow." Gnashing his teeth, Hoster did not wait for a reply as he turned. He did not wait to lead the wolf into his castle either, leaving the trembling servant who had brought Rickard's ale to show the wolf in. The moment Rickard Stark entered the keep proper, the entire courtyard seemed to release a breath long denied an escape. Then it was drowned in hushed whispers, none willing to talk aloud of what just had transpired. Jenna looked properly shocked and affronted, Tywine looked in control like always and Brynden looked after his brother and Lord Stark with unmasked fury. Jenna, after visibly recovering her breath, made her way over to her father-in-law Walder Free and his family. Tywine approached the Vances, engaging them about safety on the roads between Wayfarer's Rest and the Tooth or something else. Tijet did not really care. He looked at Brynden, his friend. His friend who Tijet was about to betray. "Brynden. Want to hit something?" "Yes," the Blackfish answered, closing his eyes for just a second. "Let's go sparring, Tijet." The training yard was just through another gate to the side. The highest tower of Riverrun was overlooking it, even if the tower was not really all that tall. There already was a prestigious pair of lords exchanging pointers. Jason Mallister was sparring with Quayan Greyjoy. The towering Ironborn was wielding a pair of battle axes lesser men would have to use 2 hands each for. The Lord of Seaguard was armed with the standard attire of longsword and shield and was proving a deft hand at avoiding and parrying. Why 2 lords of such antagonistic holdings were sparring in the yard might be the explanation for the gaggle of spectators in the ranks. Another pair to the side was made up of the youngest Went brother born to Lord Walter and his wife training young Edmure in the use of bow and arrow. Lady Went and her daughter were observing along with Lord Blackwood, whilst Geoffrey Mallister stood to the side with some lads from the houses Piper, Mouton, Cox, Vance, and D'Arry. Almost all the important houses of the Riverlands were gathered in Riverrun's training yard, in just a few boys. Brynden and Tivet took up an arming sword each. As the 2 started testing the other's guard, Brynden was already too furious to hold back any strength. Tivet obliged, knowing Brynden's fury would only increase. Low swipe. Backstep. Parry. Stab. Charge. Shield. Metal on metal. Push. Swipe. Dodge. Strike. Parry. Backstep. There looked blades released. Tivet and Brynden measured each other, a wild smile to both their faces. From the corner of his eyes Tivet could see Brandon Stark arriving at the yard with Caitlin Tully, his yet betrothed, on his arm. According to Ricard, his former heir did not have a clue of what was going to happen here. The Lady Caitlin looked prim and proper, her hair still in place and decidedly unravished. That had been Tywin's suggestion, leave Hoster no choice but to accept. Just, pluck the flower, Tywin had said. Except that Ricard Stark did not want to be bound by the marriage after Lord Tully had betrayed it in spirit, if not in word. Still, a telling bruise was now forming on Brandon's neck, just on the edge of his collar. Tivet almost felt sorry for the girl. Tivet could spare the pair no more attention as his spar with Brynden resumed. Short, vicious bouts and short breaks in between. It could not be long now. Within 5 minutes into Tivet's spar Tywin had made his way over to the gallery with both Lords Vance, and the Lady Smallwood as well. Jenna, too, had arrived with an entourage of Freys. Somehow even a high tower had joined the crowd at the balustrade. All was in place and Tivet, the soldier, the tactician, knew the time was now. Glass shattered. Something had broken the window of the topmost room of Riverrun's highest tower. The window of the solar. Glass shards fell onto the ground, and something else broke as it landed in the dirt. It was a heavy mug that had broken the window, a rest of ale was wetting the sands of the training yard. From up above, screams in a harsh northern voice could be heard coming from the now broken window. You fucking fish. Not 10 minutes passed since you said to trust you, and now you prove yourself an oath breaker in word as well. The contract is clear. The ink has dried, we have both signed it. As have our witnesses, with copies for each. Hoster Tully and Ricard Stark as signatories, Maesters Kim and Wallers as officiants, Brynden Tully and Meja Sawin as witnesses. As it is written it shall be, you taught me and I have learned. We hereby pledge to bind our houses in matrimony through the union of Brandon Stark, eldest son of Ricard Stark, and Caitlin Tully, eldest daughter of Hoster Tully. The yard was silent as a funeral. There was a short lull as it seemed that Hoster Tully seemed to answer, but forthwith the screams of Ricard Stark continued. And now you insult me and my sons. Family, duty, honor. Your words, that I am a bidders by still, while you obviously don't care about them. As written in the contract, your daughter still is to have lands half the size of your entire holdings to her name until they revert back to House Stark upon her death. And that is not sufficient to you. I will not sign away my heir to your daughter when your honor is obviously worth shit. My Ned is currently pursuing another betrothal and I am not inclined to negotiate with you. Neither should any other lord, seeing how you obviously don't care for your children. The silence in the yard was now almost oppressive, though Tivet could see Caitlin Tully standing to the side in silent shock, tears streaming from her eyes. Brandon Stark beside her almost mirrored her expression. The boy might have faked his affection, Tivet would never be sure, but he did not fake his empathy just then. That, and only that, seemed to be the only thing that stayed Brynden Tully's hand from cutting Brandon Stark down. Instead, Brynden once more directed a look filled with the promise of murder towards the window above them. The screaming picked up again. I know my eldest son is no saint, but you can forget foisting your youngest daughter off on him in exchange for the other. The contract is clear, though I pity the young girl you tricked to drink moon tea that late in her pregnancy. The whole Riverlands whispers of how you savagely killed Lysa Tully's child without a care for your youngest daughter's life. There was a silence in the courtyard so deafening in the wake of that last sentence that the tumblestone sounded loud enough to flood the world. That's why she did not greet us when we entered your keep, isn't it, Hoster? Still bound to the bed from the time you almost murdered her. Tell me, did you also convince Maester Kim to break his salutary oath, or did you buy the herbs from a woods witch yourself when he wouldn't? The silence was broken now by Caitlin Tully's deep sobs. Brandon, her kind of still betrothed, awkwardly tried to console her, but what could anyone say hearing such tragedy? Edmure Tully had long abandoned his bow and arrows, coming over to seek Brandon's embrace while tremors rocked the boy's body. The screams started again, but this time the voice of Hoster Tully rose. You fucking northern savage. I rue the day you first appeared on my door and sought to take my daughter for your son. No more of this, the betrothal is broken. I will not suffer you in my halls any longer, Stark. Leave. You are no longer welcome here. King Scab should have burned you and your misbegotten spawn. Ricard Stark did not take that lying down. A last few screamed sentences in an angry northern drawl rang out. Misbegotten spawn. My lineage stretches back 8,000 years, unbroken from one of the mightiest dynasties of royalty in Westeros. On the other hand, your entire house owes its rise over your betters in the Riverlands thanks to the kings sitting above us. Kings you so readily insult. And to think that I even arranged for the supposed sister-in-law of my son, your daughter Lysa, to be called to court as a lady-in-waiting to Princess Elia. Away from the Riverlands, where every innkeeper's daughter tells of her shame. Can she even beget children still, now that you have ruined her womb? I pity your children, Tully, but I can only say I am thankful you are such an honorless cur. Now that you broke this betrothal, at least my son does not have to suffer you as his father-in-law. I may have to break Brandon's heart, but I care for the happiness, life and health of my child, in difference to you. I'd fear for all of that if you were his father-in-law, seeing what you do to even your own children. Don't bother showing me out, Tully, I am happy for every second longer that you are out of my sight. And may you choke on your damn pride. The sound of a heavy door slamming into its frame resounded, shortly before a sobbing Caitlin Tully ripped herself from the embrace of her former betrothed and ran towards her uncle. Brandon Stark almost followed her, perturbed, but stopped in his tracks after exchanging a look with the Blackfish. Brandon Tully did not look even angry with the eldest Stark son, merely agonized for his nieces, and so very hurting. Brandon almost seemed thankful that Brandon stayed back, then. Shella rushed past Brandon Stark, enveloping her cousin Minissa's daughter in the hug of a mother, and cradling Caitlin at her breast. The eldest Tully child seemed between catatonia and hysteria as she asked for her sister, her betrothed, her mother, her uncle and for all the reasons why, all in clipped sentences between cries of anguish. Caitlin Tully asked for explanations, for comfort and for help. Never, though, did she ask for her father. Only sometimes did the words Lord Tully leave her lips amongst her sobs. The majority of the court was still deathly silent. But not all. Tijet could hear Quayan Greyjoy laughing in a deep, low chuckle. His opponent Lord Mallister, while looking sympathetic instead of amused, did not seem shocked. Shella pulled a veil from somewhere in her sleeve to cover poor Caitlin, an unusual thing to carry around with you randomly. And Tywine. Tywine wore the same smile he had worn when Tarbeck Hall had crashed down on the Hoellis and her youngest Get. Tijet had to suppress a shudder. Still the rumble of the tumblestone was echoing in Tijet's ear. Or was it the dead echo of that unnamed stream coming back to him, flowing through the mines? Brandon excused himself and his family from all in attendance. Tijet, standing close to the Tullys as he was, heard Shella saying she would take them all to Lysa and, if necessary, away from Riverrun afterwards. A furious-looking Lord Stark stepped into the trainings yard, then, stopping dead in his tracks as he beheld the scene in front of him. Ricard Stark even managed to look sheepish and almost plagued by a little guilt as the Tullys strode past him. The Blackfish had to throw away his arming sword, probably to prevent any urges that could have overcome him. The Stark Lord collected his sons and entourage, keeping a quiet and very much shocked Brandon close at hand while young Eddard and Lady Dane shot looks of pity after the Tully family. And then the Northmen were simply gone, leaving the paramountcy of the Riverlands bereft of the most valuable commodity of all. Trust. Notes. Ice on fire. Did I disappoint your expectations, or did Rookie Boy properly savage the trout? Also, shameless self-promotion, recently added the first chapter of my new story Brothers in Blood. What if the king who knelt never knelt? Check it out, posted under my Soid Incognito me. Chapter 13, Damn you, Ned, why are you always right? Notes. Title quote. Fat. Fat, is it? Is that how you speak to your king? Ah, damn you, Ned, why are you always right? Robert Baratheon, A Game of Thrones. I rarely tend to give notes before the chapter besides the quote. Still, this time. This chapter may lose me the odd reader. Or it may gain me some. You know who I'm talking about. I regret nothing. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Chapter text. They had left Riverrun in a hurry, his father leading their procession. Brandon was still processing what had happened back there, at the training yard of the Tully Castle with his betrothed Caitlin. Former betrothed. The appellation left Brandon morose where it would have made him ecstatic not a moon past. But then, nothing ever was quite like a moon past. The whole trip from King's Landing Brandon had been trying to come to terms with his new position, his new fate. Brandon had never disliked Caitlin Tully, at least after he had met her the first time. She was an awfully boring woman, but then again, awfully exciting women could rarely hope to be betrothed to the heir of a High Lord. Or, in general, pass as dutiful Southron noble ladies. No, Brandon preferred a wild northern lass any day to sate the wolf in his blood. Brandon felt his thoughts drifting again, back to those blessed days with Barbary. They did what they wanted together, and they enjoyed doing it together. Riding and hunting, crossing the wide wild plains, chasing the sun. Barbary was a better archer than Brandon himself, and she was a vision with a bow on horseback. And the sex. Barbary had enjoyed fucking, too, once she had been initiated. Then, when Brandon had first stood in his father's solar to ask for the right to wed Barbary, before Brandon could even speak, Lord Rickard Stark had given the death knell to Brandon's foolish dream. My son, I have arranged a betrothal for you with the eldest daughter of Hoster Tully of Riverrun. Brandon had run. Run from his father, run from this unknown intruder threatening Brandon's happiness, run from his own powerlessness. And oh, how Brandon had hated her. Caitlin Tully. Brandon had tried to sway his father, at first. But when Brandon's plea had been denied, his hate for Caitlin Tully grew. Brandon had held his Barbary as she cried, and his hatred grew. Brandon had traded letters with Caitlin, proper and courteous and noble, and his hatred grew. And then Brandon had met Caitlin, and she was just so happy, kind, nice. And Brandon's hatred withered. But Caitlin was not Barbary. And Brandon hated that, even as he did not hate Caitlin anymore. He simply could not love her. In those early days of his betrothal when Brandon was still hopeful, he did not bed another beside Barbary. When Brandon still had hope. And then Barbary's father had started looking to betroth his Barbary, Brandon's Barbary, to someone else. Anyone else, because Barbary was solid goods. Then, there, Brandon did not know what to do. Brandon only knew he was hurting. And the only one Brandon could blame was himself. Himself, and Barbary's father. Lord Ragnar Ryswell forbade Barbary and Brandon from meeting, to not jeopardize Barbary's chance for a good marriage even more. They continued meeting in secret, of course. But after a time, Lord Ryswell caught on, and set about making clandestine meetings for Brandon and Barbary impossible. Barbary's father finally managed to separate the two by keeping Barbary under constant guard and giving her a permanent armed escort. And all Brandon wanted to do was spite Ragnar Ryswell. Barbary was lost to Brandon, and Caitlin was boring him endlessly, despite being happy and kind and nice. And when Brandon was bored, and when Brandon was calm, and when Brandon was comfortable, he thought of Barbary. Barbary, who was probably bored and calm and comfortable herself. Barbary, who was probably betrothed already. Barbary, who maybe also sought comfort in the arms of another. Drinks helped, Brandon had found out. Fighting, too. But most of all, women helped. Nobles, commons, bastards, and whores. Brandon did not have to think with a woman in his arms. Just do. No thoughts of Barbary. The wild wolf, as everyone knew Brandon now, had been born. It had almost been a haze, Brandon recognized after. A long hazy dream since Barbary had been lost to him. Like being thrown into the long lake in an ice hole, Brandon had woken up with a start on the way back from the capital. Brandon had almost caused his own death. His friend's death. His father's death. Brandon had been, as his father had shown him, callous. What has gotten you brooding in such a somber mood, brother? That does not fit you, Brandon. You're not me. Ned rode up to Brandon's side. His little brother had been different when they had met again, after years at the Eyrie. Brandon still remembered stealing a march on Ned to get a dance for the Quiet Wolf with Ashura first. To snatch the Dornish lady after, when Ned had inevitably failed at keeping her attention. Shy, Brandon had described Ned as. Brandon had lied back then. Ned had not been shy. Quiet, yes, withdrawn, yes, but shy. No, Ned had a confidence to him that he kept to himself, that did not need the validation of others. It was something that took Brandon time to realize. However, that quiet confidence made Ned popular with anyone that took the effort to get to know him. A pool of calm wherever he went. In balance with himself. And then Ned had gotten the girl he wanted. Some people had just their life handed to them. I do not know, Ned. I had come to terms that this would be my life. Married to Caitlin. Probably banished from Winterfell when you took over, tending to my wife's lands in the north. And I have recognized that not so long ago, my future looked bleaker than that. Brandon would have liked to be left alone with that, but Ned did not grant him even that. Brandon, for what it's worth, I never wanted to rule the north after father. Shura and I, we wanted to see the world together. The Wall to Dawn, then up the western coast of Essos. Afterwards, a restored keep, maybe. A family. The last part, family, that is what remains of our dream. And you are part of that family, Brandon. Despite all. I do not want to banish you from Winterfell. Ashura will never love you, true, but you will have a place at my hearth, Brandon. Just don't. I want the brother back that I left behind when I left for the Vale. The one that played the monster when I protected Maiden Lyack. Not the monster that plays a human I met at Harrenhal. It was hard to stay mad at Ned when he was so earnest and reasonable. Of course, Brandon's anger did not just dissipate. It just lacked any purpose, then. There was not much anyone could say against those words. I'd like that. Brandon could not believe how soft his voice had gotten. That had not just been Brandon's calling. It had been his dream. Lord of Winterfell, with Barbary at his side. His dream. Not Ned's. Speaking of family, Ned started up again, Ashura is going to be your sister-in-law. Ned was silent after that declaration, hard and unforgiving. Brandon reeled at the news. Father agreed to that. Brandon could not keep the anger out of his voice entirely. And though Brandon's ire was with their father, Ned seemed to take it personally. Yes, Brandon. Or what is it? Do you think Ashura is not a worthy wife to the heir of Winterfell? Because then I might regret curbing her enthusiasm when we were writing your confession. You are not using the most vicious version yet, did you know? Brandon had to wince at that. The confession was terrible for Brandon already. Especially seeing that wherever they rode, people seemed to really enjoy hearing it. Brandon definitely did not want Ashura to get even more explicit with the wording. Ned tried to turn his horse away and ride off at that, but Brandon was quick to interject. Wait, Ned. I am not angry that you and Ashura are getting married. It is just. I once asked father to marry the woman I loved. He did not allow my request. Honestly, that was rather large an understatement of Rickard Stark's denial to Brandon's plea. Ned halted at Brandon's words, though. There was a flash of pity on Ned's face, and Brandon knew that father had told Ned. That hurt. But at least Ned did not leave. And Brandon had been wanting to talk with Ned, alone. But until now Brandon's brother had not cared much for Brandon's company. And Brandon could understand that, still. Better to talk of something aside from Ashura, first. It's just, the Danes are not the largest house. And Dawn is far, Ned. I am happy for you, Ned. Or, at least I try to be, truly. It is just, I had figured you to be slated for the daughter of a more influential family. I thought maybe for Cersei Lannister. You guys did enter the Lannister camp yesterday when we got here, after all. There was another look to Ned at the mention of Cersei Lannister, but Brandon was not sure how to read it. There was pity mixed in, though it was not directed at Brandon this time. The look was gone fast enough as Ned's eyes returned to ponds of silver before he answered. No, Brandon, I am not going to marry Cersei. In fact, Ashura and I sent the Raven for Starfall from Riverrun today, with father's blessing. We took some letters from the Rookery, too. A few lords sent their correspondence to father there, from all over the realm, actually. We just came down the tower when we saw the spar between Lord Tijet and the Blackfish at the training yard, so we went to saddle our horses. Wait. Brandon stilled at that. Something did not fit. Went to saddle our horses. The timing did not match. Why did they saddle the horses when the spar was still? Oh. How did you know? Ned turned towards Brandon to find his brother's eyes burning into Ned's skull. It must have been the voice that caught Ned's attention, low and tense. Ned stayed silent for a second, not questioning what Brandon was talking about. Brother, Ned finally replied after an eternal second, Hoster had all but condemned you to death in King's Landing. Father faced Aes for you. Did you really honestly believe father would saddle you with Hoster Tully as your father-in-law? You know, Brandon's voice did not rise above a whisper as he spoke, I think I could have come to like her. You have not seen her when it happened, when she cried over our broken betrothal. Over her broken sister. Over her broken family. Caitlin Tully would have made a great addition to the family. I think she'd been a good mother to my children. I agree. Just not a useful family addition for father. For what it is worth, I pity all the Tullys but Hoster. Useful. Useful. Brandon remembered, then. What can your marriage to Barbary offer us? And Brandon grew angry. Not in the usual way, no, this was not a hot rage. This was a cold fury. But cold or hot, anger demanded an outlet. Well, Brandon drawled, knowing the words to come to be a mistake, yet uncaring, I am awfully glad then, that beside you father also managed to find use in lovely Ashura. I see talking to you has been foolish idea, brother. I'd rather we did not speak again too soon, Brandon, Ned said, his voice steel and his tone venom, I should have listened to my beloved betrothed. And Brandon's brother left with that last sting. But Brandon did not mind the scorn. No. The cold anger helped Brandon focus as he silently went through the event at Riverrun once more. Lived the event once more. It all made such perfect sense. Why then, did Brandon feel so empty? Brandon did not love Caitlin Tully, Brandon did not even particularly like her. Did he feel responsible for her plight? Was it guilt? Brandon did not know the answers, so silent he remained. Not even a mile away from the gates of Riverrun did Brandon approach his father. Solitary at the helm, Rickard Stark looked almost serene. The tense expression and scrunch of his shoulders present at Riverrun had not left a single trace on Brandon's father. Rickard Stark had returned to his usual effortless noble bearing. It had not entirely clicked until then. Despite Ned telling him so, despite the fact that Brandon should have expected something like this from his father, that this had been a ploy. Rickard Stark always did get what he wanted, just as Brandon had seen this past moon. Today was no different. But now Brandon knew it to be truth. You goaded Tully to break the betrothal. It was not a question. Brandon did not ask as he spoke. It was a statement, an accusation. You lied to me. Father had lied to him. Lied to Brandon since they left the capital, since Brandon's world had fallen apart piece by piece. Yes, son. Your reaction needed to be genuine. The utter calm in father's voice almost extinguished any fury Brandon felt. As if it did not matter. But why? And Brandon hated that he almost sounded desperate. Because for the Lord's opinion to fall entirely in our favor and for them to continue to underestimate us as uncouth northern savages, we needed to be caught off guard when Hoster put his ambition above his honor and broke your betrothal in a manner that was both public and incredibly detrimental to his reputation. Which sounded great on paper, but a meeting in the private quarters was hardly public. Brandon saw the dots, saw the line, but for confirmation. But you talked in the privacy of Hoster Tully's solar, until I shattered the window to the training yard below with the next best object on hand and screamed at Hoster for all the lords in attendance to hear me. Lords in attendance that I had all orchestrated to be at the right place at the right time to listen to the beginning of Hoster's end. I set up Quavian Greyjoy to spar with Jason Mallister and Jeffrey Mallister to bring all the attending heirs to the yard. I asked Lady Went in the morning to have her son train his cousin Ed Muir, and to bring to the gallery all the ladies Lady Went and her daughter Linya could gather. I asked Tivet Lannister to spar with the Blackfish to draw even more a crowd, and I asked Tivet's siblings to bring all important river lords to the yard within 10 minutes of our arrival. And then Ned and Ashura came and informed Catelyn and me that Catelyn's uncle was sparring with the field commander of the Lannisters, knowing I would immediately want to see it. I did not even think about it when the two of them left to somewhere else. Yes, Brandon, Ned did help me a lot these last few days. I would have liked it if that could have been you. Maybe in another life it could have been. But then again, maybe in another life I would have burned trying to save you while you suffocated trying to save me. But there are no what-ifs. At that, Brandon felt lost. Brandon was coming to terms with what he was not anymore, betrothed, popular. However, Brandon did not know what he was supposed to be instead. What is to become of me now, father? Rickard Stark looked at Brandon, truly looked at him. Contemplative, yes, but not resigned. I don't yet know for certain, Brandon. Lady Went offered her daughter's hand for you earlier today. As well as her own hand in marriage to me, I might add. I declined, but I expect her to visit later today. If she is smart, she will not show too much anger. The Riverlands will burn, a useful alliance here would be advantageous. She will probably try to press her suit again. However, the Lady Went implied she could easily do away with her husband if I took her as a bride, and I do not intend to let such a blood-sucking bat into our castle. Few lords that cherish their daughters will offer them as your reputation spreads. I'd be cautious of those that do. His father's words that followed almost stopped Brandon's heart. If your Barbary was still looking to take you, I might not object, but her father Lord Ryswell will not be as eager anymore, now that you're disinherited. And you know she has been betrothed to the heir of Lord Dustin. Interfering too much in such private affairs carries risks for a liege lord. However, I have been looking for a way to punish both the Dustins and the Ryswells for their failures in raising you. On the other hand, any legitimate children you may have can someday pose a threat to Ned's own children. Especially if you have a northern bride from a family as ambitious as the Ryswells. The whole situation would also antagonize two important bannermen where so far only one has been wroth with us. Lord Dustin's failures in regard to you should be addressed separately anyways, and concessions will smooth relations over at a minimal cost. And without the Dustin's firm backing, Lord Ryswell will be more afraid of my ire than I am of his. Even Ragnar's new alliance with the Boltons will not suffice in that regard. It was a bitter pill to swallow. The truth hurt. Brandon would prefer to prevent that future from happening. The North did have its own tales of succession crises. Cregan's sons. The Greystocks. Sigeric Serpentongue. Brandon did not want to be the cause for more strife for House Stark. In the end Brandon saw only one solution, though he was loath to speak it. Father. I can take the black. Send me to the wall. Rickard looked at Brandon incredibly conflicted. Emotions wrought in his eyes before Rickard spoke again. I cannot, Rickard said, his voice almost broken. But why? Brandon said, in turn suppressing a shout. Brandon had offered the biggest sacrifice he could think of just then. Rickard Stark looked out over the road before he spoke, but his eyes did not return towards his eldest. When we met Ned at Deari, He sat me down the first dusk and pleaded me not to send you to the wall. I was not going to, but he could not know that. I had told him before about the plans I had made for Hoster. He knew he would never have to take your place and marry Caitlin Tully. Still, your brother came to me, despite what you did to him, Brandon. When I asked for the reason why, Ned proved to me that he would be a better Lord of Winterfell than you ever could. I am not saying this to make you angry, Brandon. But tell me, do you remember what your excuse was for your foolhardiness in storming the capital? I said I wanted to protect the pact, Brandon all but whispered as he spoke. What did Ned say? Did he ask because I was Pack? To look after me, to save me from the indignity of serving with rapists and murderers. His father once more looked at Brandon, a sliver of disappointment again shining in his eyes. It still hurt. No. Ned spoke of Benjen. Your youngest brother will now have to marry. We will need the extra alliance in the war to come. You crushed Benjen's dream of joining the Honorable Order of the Night's Watch. Brandon, I cannot punish you by giving you the one thing Benjen yearns for and in turn take the wall away from Benjen at the same time. All those changes because of your folly. Eddard saw that. I hoped you would have seen it, too. With those words Brandon's father spurred his horse on and left Brandon behind in thought. In that moment Brandon realized that he did not know his brother Eddard. The dutiful one, when they were young. The caring one. The quiet one. All those traits still applied to Ned, even as the last one had come to define him in the eyes of Westeros. Eddard Stark, the quiet wolf. Ned was not just quiet, even if that was the first thing everyone could agree on after meeting him. The realm was quiet about Ned, too. Brandon tried to look at Ned as if he had not grown up beside him for 8 years when they were children, to compare his own and Ned's reputation in the eyes of others. The wild wolf, him. Vivacious, charming, unrestrained, and easy to befriend. Never shy, not prone to wait. Emotions so overflowing that Brandon burst into bouts of fighting or fucking, whatever he desired. People flocked to him. Men befriended him. Women desired him. Over the ride Brandon had had plenty of time to analyze his own behavior a little. After he had asked his friends what they thought. His former friends. They surprised him, Ethan even opening up to Brandon a little again, as did Kyle. And they agreed with Brandon's assessment of himself. But then they added to it, and Brandon could not refute. He was whimsical. Egoistic. Volatile. Lacking restraint and easily manipulated. Cruel at times when he did not need to, like a child that did not get what he wants. The last one had been supplied by Ashura. His brother had only allowed Brandon to talk with her after Ned had stripped Brandon of all weapons and sat himself to sharpen his own blade behind Brandon. Then, Brandon had tried to apologize, but the Dornish woman had only laughed and told Brandon to return only when he actually realized what he had done wrong. That had stung. Brandon's brother, though, Eddard was a mystery in comparison to Brandon. All that people knew of Ned was that he was quiet. And, apparently, a great poet. The last was a recent addition to Ned's reputation. Little was known about Eddard Stark elsewise. Foster son of Jon Arryn, foster brother and best friend of Robert Baratheon. Fighting prowess unknown. Cunning and honor unknown. Politics and strategies a mystery. Oh, Eddard had kept in touch with letters from the Eyrie, but despite a certain eloquence to his writing, most of Ned's letters had been filled with anecdotes of how Robert got the two of them in trouble, and about how Ned had to take the reins to mitigate the disaster that inevitably followed. Brandon decided he would have a drink with his brother and get to know Ned again, today. Despite their last separation. Maybe Brandon could even set a few things right again. So, that is what Brandon did. Around noon their entire party had relocated to an inn maybe 10 to 15 miles out from Riverrun and occupied the whole building. The topmost floor was reserved for the nobles in their host, and there were not enough rooms in the whole inn for the men at arms, but it was a vast improvement over the usual camps they spent their nights in on the road. Standing before his brother's door Brandon sharply knocked and called out to Ned. "Ned, it's Brandon. Can we talk for a little?" There was a short bout of silence before an answer came. "I do not want to talk with you right now, Brandon." Despite expecting Ned's answer in light of the way they had last parted, Brandon could not help the small emotional sting he felt at the words. At the dispassionate way Ned said them. However, Brandon knew that he and Ned needed to talk again, to reconnect. Taking heart, Brandon reached for the doorknob and started to repeat his intention, first by apologizing. "Ned, I am sorry for the words I said earlier, but I would like to dot." Ashura sat straddling Ned on the divan in an almost transparent shift. Brandon should not have opened that door, he realized in that moment. Ned's fingers hovered over the silk on Ashura's thighs, but his eyes were on Brandon and Ned's stare was murderous. Brandon could see Ashura's back tremble. Brandon felt as frozen in the doorstep as he saw Ned take a cape off Ned's chair and throw it over Ashura to shield the woman view. Close the fucking door. Brandon snapped out of his trance, snapping the door shut immediately. However, Ned seemed not an ounce happier. "Why are you still in my room, Brandon?" "Oh. Right. That was why." Of course, Ned had wanted Brandon to close the door behind him as he left. "Wait," Brandon heard Ned say behind himself as Brandon made to exit. Turning around, Brandon still only saw Ashura's back, though it was now cloaked, and a furious Ned. Ashura had pressed her head into the crook of Ned's neck and apparently whispered something to her lover. "Sit," Ned commanded Brandon, and like before Ned's tone brooked no argument. So, Brandon complied. Brandon felt really uncomfortable, but Brandon complied. Brandon sat himself on a small stool at a side table positioned on the wall right next to the door. Neither Ned nor Ashura moved from their place by even a fraction of an inch. Silence filled the space between the two Stark brothers. Ned was still looking straight at Brandon, Ned's stare hard and unforgiving. Brandon, on the other hand, did his best to look anywhere but at Ned, and Ashura on his lap. After Brandon's eyes had roamed the emptiness for a second, they focused on a pitcher of wine not an arm's length from the side table. Swiftly taking the carafe and the cup beside it, Brandon poured himself a cup and drank deep. "Ah. Sour Dornish red. You barged in here to talk to me, Brandon," Ned said suddenly, drawing Brandon's attention back towards Ned, and Ashura on Ned's lap. "So. Talk." Brandon took a second sip. It was actually a rather large gulp of wine to regard the couple in front of him, and he could not find any words to talk. So they sat there, Brandon looking anywhere but at the couple. Ned looking at Brandon with eyes screaming bloody murder. Ashura ignoring everything but Ned. Brandon had never felt as uncomfortable. "Brandon. Ashura might be happy to ignore your existence entirely right now, but I do care that you barged into here. You better get to the point you came here for, instead of simply staring holes into the air. There is stuff I want to do right now that I would really prefer privacy for." It was not that Brandon did not understand where Ned was coming from, but that did not change anything about the discomfort Brandon was feeling right then. How had Brandon been supposed to know not to enter? It is not like it was his fault, now, was it? Brandon did ultimately look back at Ned to talk, but once again the sight kept Brandon silent. Ashura lay nestled into Ned's arms, looking almost like a cat nestled into an especially comfortable and scratchy rock in the sun. Though, staying with that metaphor, Ned was more of a rock with hands. A rock with hands on Ashura's ass. Despite his expressed wish for privacy, Ned did not seem willing to stop touching Ashura. Content with the shadow of a purr on her lips, Ashura pushed herself off Ned's chest a little before she started undoing the bindings on Ned's doublet. It was true, Ashura simply acted as if Brandon did not even exist. Ned, on the other hand. Ned was getting handsier and handsier with the ass of his lady love, all the while Ned's eyes remained extremely cold and trained on Brandon. Right there, right then, Brandon had a moment of epiphany, in a way. Brandon realized that this conversation was very unlikely to progress in a civil manner. This would not be a talk to bridge gaps with Ned. But Brandon thought there would never be a better chance to open old wounds again, so they could heal properly this time. Brandon hoped they would. Ultimately Brandon simply cleared his throat, then spoke. "Ned. We have not really talked eye to eye since before you left to the Uri, now more than 8 years ago. Even at Harrenhal, both of us kept little company with each other. You were always staying either with your friends from the Vale, Lyre and Ben, or Northmen that were not in my circle of friends. Or, well. Gods, this was awkward. Brandon did not know how to finish, so he simply raised his goblet in Ashura's direction. Quickly after, Brandon continued. Let's get to know each other again, Ned. Talk to me. With me. You said you missed your older brother. I talked with father today and Brandon paused, unsure of the right way to say what his father had laid bare in Brandon. I have recognized I am missing who I used to be as well. All right, brother, Ned replied, and Brandon's bated breath escaped in relief. Let us talk. I have a nice topic. Our sister. Well. Shit. Brandon's face must have fallen, for a sneer crossed Ned's face for a second before Ashura grabbed his jaw with both hands and kissed Ned with a fervor that seemed to draw a deep growl out of his lungs. The kiss held on until both released each other's tongue out of breath, panting. Ned's eyes had shortly turned to pools of liquid silver, possessive and hungry. Brandon was quite sure Ned had forgotten his presence in that moment as well. That reprieve did not last long. Still breathing with a rasp, Ashura turned to nuzzle Ned's neck, pressing her keys onto his exposed skin wandering down towards his chest. As Ned's eyes fell onto Brandon they turned hard once more. Brandon could not help thinking that maybe Ashura was not really ignoring him, but maybe using this torture as a way to get back at him. For multiple reasons now Brandon was glad the pitcher in front of him held enough wine. This did not look to be a nice talk. That proved true as soon as Brandon's brother started talking in earnest. You know, Brandon, for all the politics involved, I don't care whether or not you marry Caitlin. You never really cared for her, after all. Or about her. Robert, however, cares about Leia. But you, Brandon, were her most vocal supporter in opposing both father and me in the matter, without ever bothering to listen to us. Was all that a petty protest, just to get back at father for your own betrothal? Or do you actually have any reasons against Robert marrying our sister? Brandon almost recoiled at that, but deep inside he asked himself if there was not a kernel of truth to that accusation. On the other hand, Brandon was sure he had valid reasons Robert was unsuitable for their Leia. Could Ned really not see Robert for what he was? Good company, sure, but the whole realm knew of the Stormlord's penchant for whores. His bastard daughter was no secret, Robert was even known to visit the mother still. How could Ned ever consider such a man to be good enough for their sister? At that though Brandon felt it again, the familiar sensation of his blood pumping hotly. No. This was not the time for anger. Brandon spoke with a forced calm, but calm nonetheless. You asked for it, Ned. I mean, Lyanna threw it in your face often enough, we all heard it as well. Robert is simply not good enough for her. A bastard daughter. A renowned whoremonger. An irresponsible lordling. What else do you want to saddle Leia with? And do you honestly believe Robert will ever stay true to her? To only Leia? No, Robert will smother our Leia in southern silks in his southern castle surrounded by southern ladies. Robert will smother everything about Leia that makes her Leia while he rides off gallivanting with whores. Or do you honestly intend to tell me Robert will take Leia hunting, fight with her and love her like she deserves? Whatever Brandon expected in response from Ned, anger, quiet condemnation, a lack of understanding, Brandon had not for a moment considered Ned would simply laugh at him. Still a quiet laughter, like all Ned did, but chuckle he did. Love is sweet, dearest Ned, but it cannot change a man's nature. Ned's chuckle had ebbed and hollowed before he muttered that sentence, not without a trace of scorn. That is what Lyanna always said about Robert when she brushed me off, Brandon. She never wanted to talk about Robert. And some of what you said rings true, Brandon. Robert is a whoremonger that beds all the legs on sale he can find, and he has a bastard daughter. The whole realm knows that about Robert. There was something dark to Ned when he paused at that, and the words that followed seemed bitter as they left Ned's mouth. However, Brandon, is your reputation not much the same as Robert's? Worse, even, because Robert never tried to force anyone. Earlier you said you could have come to like Caitlin. That she would make a great addition to the family. A good mother. That is all wonderful and nice and oh so wholesome coming from you. But tell me truly, Brandon, would any of those reasons have made you stay true to Caitlin? Brandon did not answer. He did not have to. The accusation burned, like hard truths often did. Ned and Brandon both knew Brandon would not have kept to only Caitlin's bed. But Ned did not even seem to expect an answer from Brandon, or even a retort. No, Ned simply talked on. I told Leah that Robert is a good man who can come to love her with all his heart. That he will love their children. You should see Robert with his little girl, Brandon. Yes, he visits Maya and her mother. And I come along on those visits, did you know that? Father knows of this. Officially, I come along as a chaperone for Robert. There was a trace of mirth to Ned's face at those words, but his face slightly warped as Ashura traced one of her fingers from Ned's collarbone to down to his belt. Ashura's fingernail was lightly scratching the surface of his skin, leaving a white line but drawing no blood. As Ned directed a smoldering gaze at his lover, he captured her wrist with his hand, but Ashura only returned a teasing smirk. Ashura once more leaned in to claim Ned's lips, but before she reached his face Ned had grabbed her by the hips and turned her around on his knees, half lifting her. As the lady chortled throatily with abandon, Ned gently bit her ear while drawing his cape to cover Ashura's front, one eye trained on Brandon. Under the cover of the coat Brandon saw Ned's hands roaming Ashura's body. The left hand was drawing up to Ashura's tits, the other. Ashura threw her head back in an almost guttural moan and Brandon had to avert his eyes. Ned did not miss a thing, and while his hands did not stop, both his eyes now focused on Brandon. Almost seamlessly Ned talked on, then. Of course, the chaperone duty was a flimsy excuse. What I actually most wanted to see was how Robert would treat his daughter, and her mother. And you would not believe it, Brandon, but Robert is a fool in love with the little darling, always throwing Maya into the air for hours because she loves to fly and cannot stop giggling then. As for the bastard's mother, well, Robert now treats her more like a friend than a lover. It was never love or desire with Doris. Robert's parents had just died in front of him 3 weeks before Maya was conceived. What Robert found in Doris' arms was merely comfort. After Robert had learned to live with his grief, and Doris with hers, they stopped sleeping with each other. They are still fond of one another, and Robert takes care of Doris and Maya financially, but they are no longer involved. Of course, Robert is not a saint. He sleeps with whores regularly. Often. There is no point in denying that. Robert has come to enjoy sex. I mean, sex is great, is it not? It sounded like a question for his opinion, and Brandon did not know how to answer as Ned let the silence linger. The tension grew uncomfortable, until Ashura was the one to hum her approval to Ned's question. Looking back, Brandon wished he had answered before that. It was even more uncomfortable than the silence before, watching the writhing vixen on Ned's lap quivering slightly between moans. So, Brandon was almost thankful when Ned continued. Almost. But Robert is not intentionally cruel, Brandon, or callous. He knows the consequences a woman has to bear when she loses her maidenhead. If Robert did not take care of Doris financially nowadays, she would have to go whoring to support herself and Maya. To keep another small folk woman from that fate, or a noble lady from falling from grace, Robert now only sates his appetites with whores. Do tell, brother, what is your noble excuse for bedding every woman with legs? Brandon had to gulp at that. While Ned was not malicious, he was certainly merciless with his questions. Brandon knew he should answer. He even had an answer. Barbary. After Barbary. For comfort, just like Robert. But also, for spite. Now, that reason only felt pathetic. The words would not come out of his mouth and Brandon was stuck, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. In the end, Brandon was spared from answering. For Ned had all the answers. After the Riswell girl. Isn't it, Brandon? I know. Leah liked Barbary, did you know? She wrote about you too, and about the endless talks Leah had with Barbary on, and about horses. Brandon smiled at the memory, bittersweet as it was now. Ned mirrored the expression for a second, before he talked on. Brandon's own smile faltered as Ned continued speaking. Gods, it was obvious why Brandon's brother kept so quiet. Every single one of Ned's words had such weight behind them. Not a single breath was wasted on idle chatter, on and on he pressed. Honestly, compared with Robert's ordeal, yours is pathetic, Brandon. Robert saw his father, his mother, and a good portion of his household drown within a few 100 meters of his own castle. The woman you were happily bedding was not meant to be your wife. What were you expecting? It is not like it came as a surprise that you, as the heir, were fated for a strategic marriage. Every time Leah spoke out against Robert childishly, I could excuse, for she's a child. You, though, Brandon. You were just disappointing. You did not even notice that whenever you were disparaging my brother by choice, you were only disparaging yourself. Robert is a better man than you, and I am proud of the friendship we share. It was all so surreal to Brandon. Any other person would raise their voice, would grow angry when they unloaded such an amount of venom for the world to see. Ned remained stone-faced, his voice even, stroking a content lady in his lap. Ashura even smiled at the dressing down Brandon was